All right. Good to see everyone. This is the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live, episode 3 bazillion. I hope everybody's well around the world. Yeah. That said, what's that, Larry? You're at Dunkin' Donuts. Oh, you're at the Alago book signing in Rhode Island? That's right. Is it Rhode Island? Interesting. Somebody brought up a point. I'll bring Steven on right away about this, actually, about the Alago, Johnny Z, Brian Slagel connection, which is Metallica, of course, right? Hey, what's happening in Brooklyn, Dominic? Good to see you. Yeah, gang's all here. Speaking of which, let's get it moving. What's up, bro?
Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. You mentioned it's like the trilogy, right?
Yeah, this is very cool.
Brian Slagel put Metallica on, right? Johnny Z kind of stepped in after that. And then Michael Alago signed them to
Elektra,
to the Evil Empire,
and brought him to the rest of the world.
Yeah,
it's amazing when you think about how Brian, his friend, and then Johnny took this band with his life savings, and it's incredible. It's an incredible thing, and I think it's really cool that we got all three.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hey, Kevin, we're going to address all that. Brian. Yeah. All that. We're going to talk about all that. That said, today's show is going to be co-hosted by my friend and neighbor who lives on the opposite side of the street.
What's up, fellas?
What's going on up there?
Not much different than what's going on down by you.
Hey, what did they get that guy? Did that guy that slashed that guy on your block?
You know what? Like, I never heard any follow-up about them,
they got him.
Oh, wait. But, there was the younger guy, right, who slashed the tourist.
Yeah,
right?
That's the guy I'm talking about.
Well, they got him.
Yeah,
his mom turned him in.
His mom turned him in, right.
He lives on West End.
He lives down here by me.
Yeah, and so the crazy guy lives over by you, but he had like a history of mental illness, blah, 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 and his fucking mom turned him in.
Yep.
By the way, if you're wondering why I'm sideways, it's two reasons. One, for Passover, you recline, right? So I'm pretending it's Passover. But I'm at my mother-in-law's place because there's people at my apartment. It would have been too noisy. And she has one of these like super deluxe, like office chairs. Right. And like I can't just get it to be upright. So I tried.
Are you going to sit like that the whole show?
I don't think I can, but like that's why I'm this way now. So I don't want anybody to think that like there's something wrong,
True, lean over like
Steven's doing it now. Yeah, well, let's all do it.
We all go in the same way. No,
I go back and forth.
Anyway, it's like the Three Stooges.
Yes.
That said, well, I wanted to mention, and Steven had some photos of this. This is something that we didn't speak about on the show since it happened. Yeah. And that was the Jesse Malin benefit at the Beacon Theater. Our friend and patron saint down at the Bowery Electric, Jesse Malin. This was a big night, right? And Howard, you were there, right?
Yeah, I went the first night, the Sunday night.
Yeah, me too.
Which was really great. Like the spirit of the whole thing was really genuine. There was great energy there. The lineup of guests, and then you had, like Michael Imperioli, and what's her name from Weeds,
Mary Louise Parker.
Mary Louise Parker.
Cool.
They both co-hosted, and then you had all this, this parade of guests. And Jesse, played himself probably 90 minutes.
Yeah. Right.
And the show was just really great. He sounded great.
Band is so good. His band is so good.
So good. And then the moment that, his goal I read going into the shows was to stand up for one song, right? To be able to play one song standing. Mm-hmm. And so I was so blown away by the moment he stood up for the first time. And like, he's able to walk with braces and things like that. So he does stand, but to get back on stage that many years, 2 years later, and stand up and perform. And he did that for about 5 songs. He didn't.
Yeah, he did stand up. In fact, that first picture you showed, he was standing, and that was with you could see, among other people, Lucinda Williams and Elvis Costello were up there with him.
Yep.
I mean, he had just an amazing array of people. Jacob Dylan and
at first I was like, "Who's this?" I was like trying to figure out, and I was like, "Oh shit, it's Elvis Costello and Lucinda Williams."
Lucinda.
Yeah.
You know who there were 2 people who were not that they're not talented, like, but just, you know, one of them is not somebody I'm a particularly fan of, but the dude from the Counting Crows.
Is that right?
Adam Duritz.
He was fantastic.
Yeah, he was great.
And I'm not really a fan. And the other person that really, really blew me away, not so surprisingly, was Butch Walker.
Oh yeah.
Did you see Ricky Lee Jones?
Ricky Lee Jones opened.
Yep.
Ah, okay.
And she was really good. And then Alejandro Escovedo played second.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then there was like about a 10-minute break. And then Jesse's band came out with Jesse. And then guests would come out with them.
I see. And here's another shot of Jesse playing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he wrote afterward that he was crying behind his glasses and just, you know, from song number 1, like he just sort of couldn't believe the emotion of it all. And it was very special.
Well, Jesse is a great friend and supporter of this show and the Bowery Electric stuff. You know, we've done 55 shows down there, free, all ages, and you know, we couldn't done it without him, you know. Yeah,
and it's so great to see him back in the saddle. He's got UK shows coming up, and you know, he's really back, which is nice. So, you know, we wish him good health and more great shows.
Oh yeah. And that new song that he released, Argentina, is fantastic.
It's fantastic, but the thing is that She Don't Love Me Now is stuck in my head because I watched that video so many times with Paul Bearer.
It's great.
It took on a whole new life.
That tribute record, by the way, is excellent.
Incredible.
Everybody is great on it. I think my favorite this week is Rocky O'Riordan doing Shane.
Yeah,
it's so good. I mean, everyone's great on it. I mean, Agnostic Front's on it.
AF to Springsteen.
It's amazing. It's amazing, and
really well done.
You know,
cool.
I mean, it was really moving to see him when he stood up, and even when he was at the Bowery shows, and he stands up on the rail. He's been there twice already.
Yeah, he's come down to our shows. Yep.
You know, it really. You think of what the guy's gone through. You know.
Yeah, very, very proud of him and how hard he's fighting.
Right on. All right, Stephen. Well, anything else you need to mention? There you go.
Very excited to add this record.
What year is that, Stephen?
High school.
What year is this from?
1986.
Oh, this is old.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. It's like OG stuff.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
It's a compilation of early Metal Blade releases.
Drew's a big Nasty Savage fan, you know.
Yeah, who isn't?
I was saying, like, I was talking about some of the great names of that era, and one that always stuck in my head was Tragic Fantasy. We're Tragic Fantasy. That one always stuck in my head, like
Tragic Fantasy with Rough Cut and L'Amour.
I saw Rough Cut. They were great.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure I did.
Wasn't Amir in Rough Cut? Yeah.
Well, there was 2 Rough Cuts, so I always forget.
Long Island Rough Cut.
It was Long Island Rough Cut and LA Rough Cut.
And the Long Island Rough Cut guy is in Alice Cooper's band.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Tommy Hendrickson.
Right on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Stephen.
All right.
Good to see you.
I'm ready. I'm ready for 2 hours of metal right now. And Honky.
Slave to the metal. See you soon.
Right.
There you go. Good. So let me get my intro and let's bring our guest on. Let's get down. Everybody okay in the chat room? Nobody's killing each other. Lori Dawn, what's up at the Alago signing? All right, good. Did I see Didn't I see? Hey, what's up, Fred? Fred De La Cruz. I could have sworn I saw. Oh, Alan Tecchio. What's up, Alan?
Alan.
Jersey Metal represent. There you go. Here we go. Today's guest is an American music executive and hockey enthusiast hailing from Woodland Hills, California. He's the founder and CEO of the independent record label Metal Blade Records. He initiated the Metal Massacre series of compilation albums in the early 1980s, the first of which included the first commercial recording by Metallica. Metal Blade has since released seminal albums by Slayer, Merciful Fate, Cannibal Corpse, Armored Saint, Sacred Reich, Flotsam and Jetsam, Fate's Warning, Amon Amarth, The Black Dahlia Murder, and many, many others. Please welcome, coming at us from lovely Dallas, Texas, Brian Slagel. Hey, man.
Hey, man. How are you?
Brian.
I'm good.
It's quite the intro there. Wow.
Hey, listen, we're trying. How's things
What are
in
you doing in
Dallas?
Dallas?
So I have a place in Dallas because they do a lot of stuff here. King Diamond's here, so we keep an eye on him. And so I live in Vegas now. And when I moved to Vegas, what I didn't realize was not a lot of bands play Vegas for some reason. So I hate going to shows in LA and New York because, you get 1 minute with the band, right? So I started coming to shows in Dallas. All the venues here are great, and there's no one ever backstage. So I can literally spend 2 to 3 hours just myself and the band. That just never happens. So I love coming out here for that. And being a big hockey fan, I have Stars tickets because the Stars are good and the weather's really nice here. So I'm here. I'm going to see a bunch of Stars games this weekend, then go back to Vegas.
All right.
Cool. Who the Stars playing this weekend?
They are playing the Caps tomorrow, the surprising Caps. Then the Leafs and my favorite player currently, Austin Matthews, on Wednesday. And then your New York Rangers on Friday.
Well, that should be a win for the Stars.
Well, we'll see.
It's tough to watch, but we'll talk hockey in a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I hear what you're saying, living, and I'm sure, Howie, you agree, living in New York is great. A lot of bands come through, but a lot of times a band will come through and it's just like, it's the big show here. So like most of the time I don't want to hassle or bother. Hey, basically what I end up doing is I'm going to come out on the Tuesday night to Jersey or to Connecticut on the off night. So we can at least have a sit down or hang out for a second, So I hear you.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's chop it up. Let's bounce the ball back and forth a little bit. How did you come up? Did you grow up in a musical household? How did music come into your life?
No, not at all. My mom played a little bit of piano, but that was really it. It wasn't really a big music household. My first music that I heard was like Jerry Reed, Johnny Cash, kind of more country stuff, Creedence Clearwater, but it wasn't a big music house at all. And I wasn't really paying attention to music very much when I was younger. But I was 11 years old and I went to my friend's house and he played me a record by a band called Deep Purple. And the name of the record is Machine Head. And I was like, what on earth is this? I was just blown away by the sound and the whole thing. Went out and bought it the next day. And then my neighbor said, oh, if you like Deep Purple, you should listen to Black Sabbath. And that was the end for me.
It accelerated very quickly.
Yeah. 0 to 100 pretty fast. And
yeah,
I tried to play some instruments, but I have zero talent to do that. So
I hear you.
Yeah.
Same.
Was that the first music that really spoke to you, that you felt like this is mine?
Yeah, 100%. Like everything I heard before that, I liked it. I liked music, but it wasn't at the forefront of my life at anything. It was really sports. I played every sport known to man, except for hockey, sadly. Right. But that was kind of what I was doing. I started playing baseball when I was 5 and played all the way to 18. So I was a sports guy, and I wasn't really paying attention to music. But that record, a light bulb went on in my head, and I was like, "What is this?"
Yeah. And so to Sabbath, and what else as a young person kind of came into your orbit that you felt connected to?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was really lucky because like around 1976, I think it was, we got an FM station, and FM was just starting then. And there's a station there called K West, and they played Judas Priest, Kiss, Black Sabbath, all these bands. Just tons of stuff that I had never heard of before. UFO. So I discovered all of these bands from this radio station. So that's what really kind of got me going. Before that, it would just be like looking for record covers in stores. Like, I think that's how I discovered Rush was. I saw 2112 and I go, that looks like a cool cover. And I bought the record and it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's unusual though, because, when we talk about FM stations, Drew and I grew up out here on the East Side, and like no FM station, like occasionally you would hear Rock and Roll All Night, you know what I mean? But you would almost never hear Sabbath, and that would always be one of two songs. You'd never hear UFO. You would never hear some of the other bands that you mentioned. So it's interesting that the FM station out there, it looks like it went a little deeper than most FM stations in the country.
Yeah, it was kind of the Wild Wild West back then, so you could kind of play anything. And I never really got to meet anybody involved with that station necessarily, so I don't know how this happened, but that's how I discovered Kiss, like I said, UFO, just so many bands from that radio station. And Kiss went on to then become my favorite band, and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, Howie, isn't today some kind of Kiss anniversary for you?
Well, it is. It's the anniversary. 47 years ago, I saw Kiss for the first time as a 9-year-old at Madison Square Garden. It was the second of 2 nights, I think, on the Love Gun tour, and blew my little friggin' 9-year-old mind. And so, I discovered them not from the radio, but from magazines, because I was into wrestling, and then you would have like, sort of Circus and Hit Parader and Rock Scene magazine and Cream that would cover Kiss. And so you're looking at the wrestling magazines and you're like, well, who are these freaks on this magazine cover? And so that's actually how I found out who they were. And I discovered a few other bands that way, like Aerosmith and things like that, because they were in the same magazines. And then, you actually started to hear commercials on the radio for the Kiss shows. It was probably the first time you really heard sort of widespread FM radio and even some TV ads, Kiss at the Garden, blah, blah, blah. And so I think it was their second time playing the Garden, their first time playing multiple nights. And I went with a friend from Little League, and our parents took us, dropped us off at the Garden, and went out to dinner, left us there, and then picked us up when it was over, and we had just seen Kiss. And it was just, you didn't think about another thing for about a month.
But I think we've mentioned this many times on the show, is that back then radio was a real conduit, and for guys our age, it's kind of all we had. There was no internet. And sure, we could connect the dots with like Circus Magazine or Rolling Stone, but it was radio. And I know this was later on, not much later, but a bit later on. But a station here like WSOU was a station that really polarized, heavy and hard music here in the tri-state area.
There were before SOU too, because you sort of, it took me, I don't remember what age it was, to really discover that there was college radio, and that there were these, 1 or 2 hour shows once a week somewhere, that played music that you weren't going to hear on mainstream radio. So like NYU out here had great radio programming.
And Stony Brook out on the island too.
Yep. And WCWP, CW Post had a great weekend, hard rock programming. And, that's where I started to, well, not the beginning, but that was part of a handful of things that introduced me to these bands that I really didn't know about. Right. So, after like Maiden and Priest and Sabbath, there was a big drop off in the ability to hear about these bands unless you looked for them. And so, you had to seek that stuff out, but there was some great college radio.
But I'm a lot older than you guys are, so
don't bet on it. But
I'm 60. I'm 63. So, but
I'm going to be 62.
Okay, good. So we both look good for our ages, right?
We're in the same ballpark.
Well, you guys were well into elementary school when I was born.
But being in LA at the time, like I said, I was so lucky for that radio station because there weren't really any magazines or there wasn't really anything. Like I said, half the time I would just go into a record store and look through the bins looking for an album cover that might be something that's hard rock. So that station kind of saved my life. Like all of a sudden I was finding all these bands, and then the record store guys would say, "Oh, you're into this? Maybe you should listen to this band." And that it was like the days before, the wheel was invented or something,
Sure.
trying to figure out new music.
And so going along the timeline, Brian, you get exposed to some of these bands, and did you, as a young person, did you end up go out and get a job, and where did you end up?
So no, thankfully, I've actually never been on a job interview in my entire life, which is kind of crazy. So when I was in school, Sears, if you remember them, had a program where they'd basically take one class of kids and put them to work for free for like an entire semester.
Wow.
And then at the end of it, they hired 2 people, and I was one of the ones that they hired. So I ended up doing that, but it didn't have a lot of money. Grew up in a single mom household, not super poor, but not super rich. So they didn't have a lot of money. So what I started to do to help with my fueling record addiction, I started to tape and sell live concerts. Yes, I was a bootlegger, but that was also interesting because I was trading tapes with people all over the world, and I discovered a lot of new music from that too. So we worked at Sears, started tape trading, and then everything went from there.
Were you taping yourself, or were you just getting the live shows from other people?
Oh, no. Both. I was taping myself. When I was 18 in 1979, I went to 250 concerts. I went to everything.
Yeah.
And I was lucky because I saw a bunch of shows I would have never gone to, not knowing, but I knew that they were going to sell. I saw Pink Floyd do The Wall. I saw Springsteen play like 3 nights at the Los Angeles Arena. I saw all these great shows. The Eagles doing Hotel California, stuff that I not necessarily would have gone to, but I know, hey, if I go to these shows and tape them, I'm going to make money. And then every single penny I got, I went out and bought records.
You're like a Rerun at the Doobie Brothers show,
Right?
with the tape recorder falling out from under your jacket.
Right?
Are there any gems from that era when you were recording bands that like turned out to be sort of like, this is an incredible golden sought after? Boy, am I glad I dragged the deck to this one. Is there anything that really was like a real standout of your early collection?
Well, certainly the Springsteen stuff was great because I knew him, and I was a casual fan. I heard him taped on my reel to reel, the show he played at the Roxy here in LA. But going to that show, like, you got to remember, like in the 70s, shows were maybe an hour and 5 minutes, maybe an hour and 10 minutes.
Wow.
And he went out and played 3 hours.
Always.
And it was amazing. Like the crowd reaction and the band. I didn't realize everybody could play for that long at that level. And those shows were just so great. And the tape recorder, look, it's not the best tape recorder, but the sound quality was fairly decent. So that was cool. Like I said, the Eagles doing Hotel California was great. Pink Floyd, The Wall. I mean, those are some of the shows that, like I said, I probably would not have gone to if it wasn't for the fact that I was taping. But I'm so glad that I went because they're historical shows.
And I think that having grown up in that area really situated you in a zone where there was just so much music. Go this direction. This is happening. There's just so much going on out there in that vicinity.
Yeah, 100%. Because there was not only the big arena shows, but there were shows at the Whiskey, the Roxy, the Starwood. I've got bootlegs of the Dead Kennedys and X, and I saw Black Flag a couple of times, but I never taped them for some reason. It was harder to tape in the club environment because they're so small, and somebody sees that little red light and you're in trouble. And I wanted,
especially in California, right? Like,
I didn't want to get kicked out of the shows, but it was the opportunity to see concerts was just amazing.
Did you ever see the Germs? Michael LaRoche asks.
Hell yeah, I saw Black Flag, the Germs. I saw everybody in the LA punk rock scene, even the Go-Go's when they were punk rock.
I
How
assume
did
you saw. Go ahead.
I was going to say, how did you find and build the network of the people that you traded with? Because I know, obviously, later the magazines had pen pal sections and things like that where people were actively seeking people to trade with. But this sounds like it was pretty early on. So where did you find other people to trade stuff with?
Yeah, so what was going on there? There was this famous thing called the Capitol Records swap meet. And in the parking lot of the famous Capitol Records building in Hollywood, once a month, they would have this swap meet that went from, I want to say 10 o'clock at night until like 5 o'clock in the morning. And it was filled with predominantly people selling bootlegs, cassettes, vinyl, everything. So I just kind of went in there. I first started going as just a fan and buying stuff. And then I eventually started selling, but I met a lot of people there and networked through a bunch of people there. And then the magazines came, the Circus and Cream and the Pen Pals in the back, and people looking for live tapes. But there's a whole network system even before that you go, oh, you should check out this guy's stuff or check out that guy's stuff, and then I get in touch with them and they say, oh, you've got this show from LA, I've got one from there, let's trade, and it just kind of started from there.
It's probably a lot of Grateful Dead tapers that also had other stuff, right? Because they were so used to taping, and you probably couldn't go to these other people's shows with the gear, that they allowed into Dead shows. But that was like, to me, the big sort of taping movement that came first, where people were taping these Dead shows legally.
Yeah, that was legal though.
Right, with real microphones and it was
interesting,
kind of high tech in a way.
It certainly was an interesting concept, which was, hey, let them tape the stuff, let them get the stuff out there, pass it around. Like it's good for us. They definitely had a different, approach. Whereas like someone like Frank Zappa or a lot of the other bands or the Rolling Stones or a lot of the bigger bands, were terrified. The Dead, invited it in and in a certain way kind of, rolled with it and parlayed it.
Well, that was the big misconception about bootleggers back then. That we're all just fans. The people buying the bootlegs were already big fans, and they were going to not going to buy this stuff. And a lot of times people got turned on to these bands via these tapes as well. Sure. So it wasn't taking any money out of the major labels or the band's mouths. If anything, it was putting more money into them. Certainly my side of it, and a lot of my friends, we were doing this just to get enough money to buy more records. So I wouldn't be able to buy 250 albums or whatever I was buying then if I wasn't doing this.
And I guess this is something that we're going to get to, is sort of as you kind of came into the business, you came up against a lot of this old archaic sort of infrastructure and thinking, and sort of had to reimagine a lot of it and work around a lot of it, right? Yeah,
I mean, look, when I first started, I knew nothing. I didn't intend to start a record company. That was never my intention. It just kind of fell in my lap, basically. Mm-hmm. So I was learning on the job, and it was interesting. The early days of doing it independently, that was a lot of fun because I was learning and, making mistakes, but you learn from the mistakes and you're kind of growing the company. It wasn't really until much later, like when we got to Warner Brothers, we had to deal with Warner Brothers for 4 years. And that's when the whole corporate thing kind of was stuck right in my face. And you would hear stories about that, about how it was there. But until you get there, a lot of stuff that people tell you happens. And it was very disconcerting. But it was a great time to be there. I got to work with the legendary Mo Austin, who was a phenomenal person and, one of the biggest legends in music of all time, and Lenny Waronker. And there were some great people there, but it became very corporate as time went on, sadly.
Sure. Let's talk about how this came to be, and what were the events leading up to this?
Well, hold on. Even just to take one step back before the fanzine itself, is how did you actually start to become exposed to, let's say, the new wave of British heavy metal from LA?
Again, the bootleggers. So one of my friends in Sweden sent me an AC/DC live tape from Stockholm in like 1978 or something. And he said, hey, there's this new band named Iron Maiden that just put out something called the Soundhouse tapes, their first original demo. And so I thought you might like this. So he put that on the end of this tape. And I got to the end of the show and listened to it. I was like, what is this? It freaked me out. I'd never heard anything like that before. Like I love heavy music and everything, but this was on a whole different level and super exciting. So I was like, what is this? So I started to try to do whatever work I could to figure this out. Again, kind of living in Los Angeles was lucky because the record stores that I went to, like Moby Disc and Licorice Pizza and the other ones, they would bring in the English magazines, NME, Sounds, all this sort of stuff. And Sounds was kind of the magazine that started this thing. So I went and bought a Sounds, and they started talking about all these bands in England, and the new wave of British heavy metal was happening. And that's how I first learned about it. And then it was, difficult trying to find the records and the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that was, it was on very few people's radar here. And we'll get into, the Lars Ulrich connection out there as well with you. But so now, again, just like you were bootlegging very early, somehow you decided to publish a fanzine very early. And again, there weren't tons and tons of them quite yet covering what you were covering in America. So, what made you go, oh, I should create this zine?
Well, literally everything I did was based on the new wave of British heavy metal and what was happening over there. And that my fanzine was the first ever heavy metal fanzine in the United States. I'm always happy to say that.
Yeah.
But I was so passionate about the music, and I couldn't play anything, so I couldn't be in a band. So I'm like, well, what can I do to share this? I want other people to hear about this music. So one of the big things that was happening in Europe at the time and in England were fanzines, like kids putting together their own little zine. So I thought, well, I'm going to do that. So I just put it together with a couple friends of mine. The first thing, which you've got up there, is written on a typewriter and Xerox.
Love it.
I probably made 100 copies of them, but I was able to kind of get it out there, and people are starting to slowly discover some of these bands in the US. So it's fun.
And I love it. July 1981, which is personally really interesting, because in July in 81, I was sort of on a parallel path, in the hardcore punk world. We're doing fanzines, and basically, the hardcore thing was running, side by side. We've talked about, but I just love like Iron Maiden, Saxon, Samson.
Yep.
Wasn't that Bruce Dickinson?
That was Bruce Dickinson's band. Yeah.
Yep.
Girls' School, Motorhead, Crocus, Tigers of Pantang, a personal favorite, and more. And of course, Motorhead. Motorhead was always in the mix. Everybody loved Motorhead.
I'm wearing the shirt today. It's like it's just lifelong, love. But it's, I think, the first American zine, because I started to get hip to. I was a Kerrang reader. They started around this time, right? About 81.
Yep.
And so you had Kerrang, and then you had like Metal Forces a little later, and you had what was the German magazine, Metal Hammer, and then you had a couple others, and then in America there was Kick-Ass Monthly, right? So there was Bob Muldowney out on Long Island who had this thing called Kick-Ass Monthly. I think he kicked it off in like 82-ish, right? And he would write about bands like the Rods and things like that, maybe even Manowar at that point, things like that. And later on he would be like the first guy in New York. Sledgehammer Press was a good one. He'd write about Metallica and Raven and a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal bands. But I got turned on between the tape trading, the fanzines, the college radio. That was where music came into my life. That's where it really happened. And then by that time I was old enough to go to some shows and basically see some of these bands. And then you realize they're at clubs and they have some of the younger up and coming bands, and you can go see them. And, I snuck into quite a few shows that way with the fake ID from Butterfly on 8th Street. Like, what college do you go to, sir? Oh, NYU. I think I was 13, and, then you're going to Lemoore, and you're even going to Lemoore East, and, traveling to Long Island or Jersey and seeing shows. And then suddenly you're, seeing Venom, in Staten Island with Metallica opening, and you're one of the like 30 people who's ever heard of Metallica because of your compilation.
That's awesome. It was a fun time because we all of us, bands and people became music business people. We're all just doing it for the love of the music. We never thought anything would ever happen with this music. Not clearly as far as it's gone, but
Yeah, it is.
It was an innocent time, and it was just a lot of fun because, especially living in LA, I didn't know anybody. I had one friend that liked the new British heavy metal stuff at first, and I didn't know anybody else who liked this stuff or knew anything about it, especially in the United States. And as soon as I started doing the fanzine and then eventually started working at the record stores, like there's a whole network of people all over the place that like this music. It was amazing.
So how did you ultimately? Sorry, I was going to ask how you ultimately connected with Lars Ulrich.
Yeah. So here's the story.
Before we jump in, you mentioned record store. Were you working in a record store? Like, what was the nucleus?
Yeah, you worked at a store.
Just to set the table a little bit.
Yeah. So I was working at Sears. Exciting. Selling typewriters and cameras, which I didn't know anything about. But anyway, so I used to hang out at I hung out at record stores, and there was this one little record store near my house called Oz Records, OZ Records.
OZ.
And I would just hang out there because it was like a mom and pop place. It was super chill. People that worked there were really great. And then my best friend started working there. So I started hanging out like after they would close and hanging out with the owner and all this stuff. And, they knew I was a big music head. I was buying a ton of my music there. I was begging them, like, can you bring in the new Iron Maiden single or whatever it was? And eventually one night, I'll never forget, I was there afterwards with my buddy, and he had to go home. And the owner said, hey, stick around for a couple minutes. So, okay. So he left, and he said, so I have a question for you. Would you want to work here? And I was like, are you kidding me? It's my dream to work here. He said, okay, I'm going to hire you because I have to fire your friend. And so it took me about 5 minutes to go, okay, that's my best friend. He's going to fire him, but he's offering me, I'll take the job. I'll figure the rest out later. So I started working at the record store. The first thing I did was begged him to give me like a little bit of a budget, like give me $150 and let me try to find some of these singles that we were, all trying to find. Right. So I went to the Important in New York, which has evolved basically into the company that distributes us now through Sony, and one in LA called Green World that eventually ended up giving me my first pressing and distribution deal, and said, hey, can you bring me in Iron Maiden, Saxon, Def Leppard, Manta, whatever it was. And they would, slowly bring some stuff in. And all of a sudden in I don't know, 3-4 months, we had a whole bunch of people coming in, buying this stuff. I was ordering, 50 pieces at a time of things. Wow. So it was crazy.
That's exciting.
It was so much fun. So much fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we both did something similar, but didn't work at record stores. I wound up working at Important. That was, my first proper music business job. I was a salesman, for, Important. And the thing about it was ultimately like the raiding the warehouse days, and the sort of like looking and finding like some Venom picture disc, that like they had 5 of that they brought in. And I was like, those were the perks of the job, because I was like, I'm not getting paid very much, but I'm not paying for any of these records either. Yep. So it's pretty great.
I worked at Strawberry's record store in Kenmore Square in Boston. And of course, what I had the ability to do working for the corporate monolith, Strawberries is, my friends would come in and get a stack of records like this and bring them up to the counter. And I go, 10 records at $1.59 each, right. Pink Floyd, The Wall, double album, like Rush, All the World's a State. So, that's something that I was doing in 1982, 82 actually. But like you said, there's always gems that will come across, weird, singles and stuff like that. I remember, stuff like that. But
the other thing is the UK was very big on singles, and there would always be great B-sides. And very often they would never come out in America. So you'd have to get these singles sometimes to get the B-sides. And some of those B-sides were fantastic songs.
Yeah, and I was bringing in stuff all over the place. I think I was the first person to bring in, because we sold all the Twisted Sister singles when they were putting them out. So I might have been the first guy in LA to start selling those. But it was just fun to turn people on to music, because I get somebody coming in and buying, Zeppelin or Sabbath record. I say, well, if you like them, listen to Iron Maiden or Merciful Fate. And they go, oh man, this is really great. So it was just turning people on to music was the best.
It's great. Everybody's chiming in. I worked at Tower, Strawberry. Everybody, a lot lot of people had those kind of jobs. You know, someone just sent this to me just as a last comment on kind of the rags that we, you know, from that era. Here's another, Stephen Messina.
Yeah, Metal Forces. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's legendary.
Yeah, Stephen Messina just, you know, of course, Stephen Messina probably just took this picture. It's probably sitting within arm's length of him right now, you know. So, but yeah, I think this is of course is a little bit later on, but yeah, Metal Forces was a big one, you know.
Yeah, that looks about 85, 86.
Yeah.
But that was a key magazine because again, a lot of us who were big up on Kerrang, which was, you know, a Bible. This went a little deeper and a little further underground, and was sort of big on, you know, the beginnings of thrash metal from sort of the 83, 84, 85, 86 period.
And again, those magazines in Europe are so vitally important because we're talking way before the internet, way before anything else. So, you know, them publishing stuff and getting some sort of at least limited distribution in the U.S. was gold for all of us fans, because I found out so many bands through those fanzines and magazines that I'd never heard of before either. And
it's another thing that Important distributed. Like, they distributed a lot of those magazines.
Yeah, that was such a lifeblood, is getting all that stuff. Even like the Sounds in the early days, to get that stuff was just, I'm you know, sitting in LA, being into the scene that's in England so far away, and just begging for any morsel I can get of information.
Yeah. And Sounds was a tough one because of the size, right? It was a newspaper.
Like a newspaper.
So, like, it was hard to put on a shelf, you know, like the way you would in magazines. But that was a crucial, for punk and for metal, just a crucial magazine in terms of exposing bands around the world.
Yeah, and that kind of leads really well into the Lars story too, because it was all kind of, we're talking about the same time period. So in December of 1981, the Michael Schenker group played a venue called the Country Club in Reseda, California, which is kind of where a lot of people played at the time. And that was an interesting show for a variety of reasons, because like everybody from Motley Crue was there, everybody from Metallica was there, everybody from like every band that would kind of come on later was there. A lot of them didn't know each other. So after the show, my only other friend in LA that knew anything about this scene was my friend John Cornarens, who, you know, helped me with the fanzine and helped with the first Metal Massacre. So he was going to his car after the show in the parking lot, and he sees this kid wearing a Saxon European t-shirt. Now in 1981 in Los Angeles, nobody knew who Saxon was, let alone had a European t-shirt. So he runs over to this kid. He goes, "Where did you get that shirt?" And he goes, "You know who Saxon is?" Like, "Yeah, I love Saxon. Like, where did you get that?" And it was Lars. He had just moved to Southern California from Denmark, maybe a month before that, and went to the show. And so John's like, "You got to meet my friend Brian. Like, we're so into this stuff." So a couple days later, we ended up I think it was at my house. He came over, and we just started hanging out, talking music, and, you know, we playing some stuff that he might not have heard. And, you know, for him, coming from Denmark to LA, like uprooting his whole life, and, you know, he's a foreigner in this new, he was so into all that stuff. He thought, "Oh, I'm going to go to LA. I'm not going to know anybody there that knows anything about this music." And all of a sudden, the first people he meets are these two other crazy kids that love the music. So we bonded really quickly over that. And it was funny though. So I always used to tell people about what was Lars like at 16? Like, he was crazy, like had a lot of energy. So we would go, there's three of us, right? So there are a few record stores that would bring in a couple singles maybe from the new wave of British heavy metal scene. So we'd all go together, but we all knew like there's only one copy of something there. So how we, you know, who's going to get it? So whenever I would usually drive, and when we would get to the store, like this kid he would be in the backseat. He'd be out of the car and halfway to the record store before he even got the key out of the ignition. He was crazy. So, but it was a lot of fun.
And you guys have remained friends ever since, right?
Yeah. To this day, I was doing an interview earlier talking about some Metallica stuff, and, you know, talking about Lars, and it's there's a really interesting dynamic that we have. Like, whenever we talk or hang out, we revert back to being, you know, 16 and 18-year-old kids. That's awesome. The same thing. He's really such a good dude, and it's just the success he's had is just mind-boggling, of course. And just from my, you know, fairly limited interaction with them, you know, directing the Alago film and interviewing him and those guys, and I've, you know, a couple of times, they worked hard for it, man. Yeah.
You know, it didn't magically happen. That's a band, and that's a guy him and James, who have an incredible work ethic. They have an incredible work ethic, and that's a testament to just the success they have. It wasn't just we were in the right place in the right time and we just fell into it. Those fucking guys worked hard, man.
Yeah, 100%. And the one thing that I've always loved about them over all these years is, as big as they are, they're still fans. They're still real fans. And, we have conversations about new bands and stuff. I remember when I first turned James Hetfield on to Ghost, like he was freaking out like a little kid, like, oh my God, this new band is so amazing. And they've always maintained that. They've always been really good to fans, really good people. Their whole organization. I think that's one reason people ask, well, why are they so big? They're surrounded by so many great people between Cube Art Management and all the people that work for them. The crews live are all first class people, and it's been good to see.
All their people, Bree and everybody in their will. So give us some perspective on how this came together and.
So I was working at the record store, and one of the guys who used to come in and buy a lot of stuff came up to me and said, hey, there are heavy metal bands here in Los Angeles. And I go, there are? He goes, yeah. So the first show I went to was at the Troubadour in Hollywood on a Wednesday night for $1 and saw Motley Crue and Rat. Woo. And I was like, oh, wow. And they were both a lot heavier at that time. And I was like, wow, there are metal bands here. So I started to get into the scene. And by the way, the guy who told me that is a guitar player from Bitch, who we ended up having a long relationship with as well. Mm-hmm. So I started seeing all these bands in LA, metal bands. But again, you're talking 1981 in LA. No, major labels don't care. There's no outlets for anybody to know that these bands exist. Just nobody cares. And I'd seen a band growing up as a kid when I was in high school going to shows called Exciter, not the Canadian one, but the LA one, XCITER, which is George Lynch was a guitar player.
That's right. And
I thought this band was going to be the biggest band ever. They're going to be the next Van Halen. They're fun, and they just fizzled out because there was no scene, nobody cared, nothing ever happened. And I didn't want to see something that happened to LA. So again, influenced by the new wave of British heavy metal, and there was a whole bunch of independent compilation albums. I just went to the bands and said, hey, look, if I put together a compilation album of LA metal bands, would you be on it? And everybody said yes. And then I went to the distributors, Important and Green World and Gem, and said, if I put together this album, would you guys distribute it? And they all said yes. So it's kind of one by one, started getting bands. I had no money. So the bands had to somehow record something because I had no money. Barely had enough money to even make the 2,500 initial copies. So, the bands went in and recorded stuff and ended up putting together. Motley Crue was supposed to be on it, but I did a lot of stuff for them in the early days, including telling their managers who had 900 Motley Crue records they finished. And what do we do with these? And if I knew then what I knew now, right? I said, take them to Green World. They'll sell them for you. And they got huge. So it didn't make any sense to have them on. But so they weren't on. But then, my friend Lars calls me and said, hey, if I put together a band, can it be on your record? And I said, sure. And that, of course, ended up being Metallica.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, what amazes me, and I bought the first one right when it came out. I still have it. I completely forgot until today that it actually is the new Heavy Metal Review Presents Metal Massacre. But let me just, for people who don't really know these compilations, let me throw some names at you, many of these being the first commercial appearances of these bands, right? Metallica, Rat, Slayer, Armored Saint, Trauma, which was Cliff Burton's band, Voivod, Metal Church, Hellhammer, for people who don't know, became Celtic Frost, Possessed, Hyrax, Dark Angel, The Obsessed, Flotsam and Jetsam, Cryptic Slaughter, Sacred Reich, 6 Feet Under, Bolt Thrower, and a Monomorph. And I'm sure I'm missing plenty that, went on to do good things.
A good one was Hawaii, which is Marty Friedman.
Yes.
Wow.
I forgot about that one. And he just put a book out.
Yes.
So, it's just like that's one of the ways that people got turned on to a lot of these bands, especially like the first batch of these records, because metal was still new and kind of fresh for people. And there was just like this discovery moment going on, and people were seeking out bands, and you were giving us what we wanted. And I guess the question is why a compilation first? I know, again, going to Europe, UK, there were compilations that were coming out over there. Were you just sort of like, let's do that here?
Well, yeah, exactly. That's how the initial idea came, and then it did pretty well. And all of a sudden, there are more bands in Los Angeles, or bands coming from elsewhere, like Trauma from San Francisco, which is Cliff Burton's band. And I mean, look, I didn't have enough. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have enough money to put out records by all these bands or anything. So I just thought, well, this is a good way for people to hear a band. Here's a song by a band, and if they're good, check it out. And the whole impetus for doing this in the first place was just to turn people on to bands that I thought were really good and music that I really liked. And luckily, it kind of worked out, and a lot of other people found these bands through that vehicle, and that was what it was meant to do. So I'm happy that it did all that.
Now, why did Metallica not wind up on Metal Blade?
Money. So they came to me when they were in LA before they had moved to San Francisco and said, so we have this guy that will record an album in this really nice studio for $10,000. I said, well, that's nice. I don't have $1,000, let alone 10,000, and no way to ever get the money. So there was no possibility, and they had no money. So, right. Like with Slayer, I think it was Carrie's dad and Tom's dad put up the $3,000 to record the Slayer record. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to make a record. And Metallica, I guess, didn't have any money, and none of us had any way to get it. So we never did. And then Johnny Z, said, "Hey, I'll get some money and record a record." So it's all. I mean, for me, it's all good. I'm happy that everything went great, and they've had this career, but that's the reason. It's just money. If I had $10,000, then they probably would have been on Metal Blade.
And $10,000 was a lot of money back then.
Oh yeah,
I mean, that was a lot.
I couldn't get the High and the Mighty single printed up in 1983 because we couldn't come up with a couple $100. Well, and about $10,000, man, that's a lot of money.
And recording in LA back then was really expensive. Like we were like Metal Blade was really saved a lot by Bill Matoyer, who was our original engineer, and he was working at a studio called Track Record. Yeah. And the guy who owned Track Record was just a really good guy, and he would give us studio time overnight for dirt cheap, like I don't know, $10 an hour, something insane. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to make a lot of these records.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask the first Hit the Lights. Who was in the band Metallica when Lars kind of said, "Can you put my band on there?" Like, who was in the band then?
So the funny thing is there was no band. So when Lars called me up and said that, he had devised a plan. Like he had jammed with James a couple of times, but nothing really came of it. So he decided, like, well, let me ask Brian if I could be on a record. And I'm going to go to James and say, hey, we can be on a record. And look, being on a record in 1981 was huge for anybody. So when James heard that, it's like, oh, hell yeah. So the first Metallica song was recorded on a Fostex cassette.
Nice.
Google that one, folks.
Like a 4-track?
Yeah, 4-track. Yep.
Yeah.
So it was Lars on drums, James on guitar and bass, and Lloyd Grant, Lars' friend, played the lead. And that was it. That was who was on that first one. James was singing.
Excuse me, who was Lloyd Grant? I'm not familiar with.
So Lloyd Grant was a friend of Lars. He was a guitar teacher, and I can't remember if he might have been teaching Lars, or I forget exactly what, but he was a guitar teacher. So, James wasn't good enough to do a lead at that time. So Lars knew Lloyd and said, hey, Lloyd, can you come play a lead on this song? And Lloyd's like, yeah, sure. Why not? So
who played bass?
James
just did it. Yeah.
And wasn't there a point where, didn't you connect those guys with
Cliff?
With Cliff?
Yeah. So, So Lars called me one day and said, hey, we really love Ron McGovney, who was the original bass player. Sure. But as we're getting better as musicians, we just don't feel Ron's coming along as fast as we are. So we're looking for a new bass player. Do you know anybody? So, we talked about a couple LA guys, and I think they'd already asked them, and they said no. And I said, well, there's this band from San Francisco called Trauma, and they're on Metal Massacre 2. And they just came down to LA and played a show at the Troubadour. And the bass player was insane. Like the band was okay, but he was just, I'd never seen a guy play like that. There's hair everywhere. It was nuts. I said, you should come see them. They're playing again in LA in a couple of weeks. So sure enough, gig turns up. Lars and James come out. They're watching the show. And I don't know, 10 minutes in, Lars goes, that guy's going to be our new bass player. I was like, whatever, Lars. But, he has a way of making things happen. And sure enough, he ended up being in the band.
And Cliff winds up telling them, I'll be in your band if you move up north.
Yeah, which actually was I was actually talking about it earlier, something else, but really that was such a seminal moment for that band because in LA they did not have a following. In
Right.
fact, they were getting banned from clubs because they were too heavy.
Right.
So it couldn't really connect with people. And I had booked a Metal Massacre show in San Francisco, and they went up and played that. And the No Life Till Leather, the original one, was out at that point. So all those kids up there had that demo, and we went up there not knowing what to expect. And these 200 kids or whatever went nuts for Metallica. Like they never had a crowd like that in LA.
Audience,
So by them moving to San Francisco and being involved in that scene, that really gave them a whole breadth of energy and newness. And it really, if they hadn't have done that, it's hard to say in history. I mean, they probably would have done well anyway, but that was a big moment for them. And, Cliff provided the way to get up there basically.
I have a quick branch of that tree question because, sometimes I forget that and it's hard to believe that I would forget this, but that Dave Mustaine was in Metallica.
Yeah.
And so, basically, so when he gets thrown out and they splinter off and Kirk joins Metallica, were you having any conversations with Megadeth about signing them?
So, yeah, let me see how I can explain this. Because David and I had a disagreement about how this actually happened. But
wait, Dave had a disagreement with somebody?
Yeah, I know, right?
It's hard to believe.
So my recollection is that Dave sent me a letter saying, I'm putting together a new band. I would be interested in being on Metal Blade. What do you think? So apparently, and I couldn't remember who I talked to, and apparently I talked to somebody in Dave's world at that time, like a manager or a representative or something. I never talked to Dave himself. And we offered them a deal, and they ended up taking the combat deal because it was more money. So, which made sense. I totally understood that. But yeah, we tried it. We probably at that point made the largest offer we'd ever made to a band at that point for Megadeth, but it just didn't work out.
Yeah. Howie, were you over at combat at the time?
So I didn't get to Import until 87. So this all happened a couple of years before I was there. But again, I was like a fan of all these labels. I was a fan of Metal Blade. I was a fan of Megaforce, Roadrunner a little bit later, but mostly, Megaforce and Metal Blade were my go-to metal labels. They were brands to me, so kind of whatever would buy because it was on those labels. So, I remember 85 was a big year because a lot of stuff was happening, right? So Megadeth comes out. Slayer is really becoming like the kings of modern metal and aggressive metal. The crossover is happening, which I want to talk about Death Records a little bit too. And so the metal and hardcore thing is coming together, and there's this renewed life in this aggressive music that I don't want to say it started in 83, but it really started to come together in 83, with the Kill 'Em Alls coming out and the Show No Mercies and certain other records. DRI and COC had records out, but they weren't in the same universe quite yet as the metal bands until sort of 85. So it was an interesting time. And, you have Haunting the Chapel, the EP come out after Show No Mercy, and then Hell Awaits comes out, and then you also have that Ultimate Revenge moment, right? So you have this show at Studio 54 with Venom, Slayer, and Exodus, and that was such a big, the previous big event in New York, live show wise, was the Raven Metallica Anthrax show in 84, where you were like, I can't believe these three bands are playing together, and I can't believe they're going to sell this place out, there's going to be over 3,000 people at this thing. And then you have Studio 54, which had never done a rock show, let alone something as aggressive as this. And you have Venom, Slayer, and Exodus. Venom's kind of, I don't want to say on the way out, but people figured out that the one trick pony that was Venom, and they were kind of on the downslide, right? And Slayer was the band at the time. And now Exodus finally gets their album out, and they're going to play New York for basically, it was technically the second time because they played the night before. They played a warm-up show. with Slayer at Lemoore East, which very few people knew about. If I had known about it, I lived in frickin' Queens and I didn't know about the show. So, it was a really pivotal time for aggressive music, and Metal Blade was just one of those labels that was in on it. And that was the year you guys put out, Dealing With It by DRI, and you put out Animosity by COC, and then Cryptic Slaughter was a little later. And it was becoming one big thing in a way for quite a while. And it was just an amazing time. And Slayer was they took over, so Metallica was just getting bigger, bigger, bigger. But of course you have the assholes that start complaining about Metallica, having a quote unquote ballad or whatever. They put an acoustic guitar on one of their songs and it's they betrayed us.
When Ride the Lightning came out, those sort of people, and there were a lot of them, nicknamed that record Ride the Light Bulb.
I remember. And I'm like, what? You gotta be kidding me. I was a purist and I was an asshole that way, but not that much of an asshole where I was like, no. They've sold out, Yeah.
Before we kind of, can we just get, how did Metal Blade come together? What was the point where you were like, I'm going to start a label?
So basically I put out the Metal Massacre, had no money to do repressings, gave the rights to a company called Gem Records that I have no idea how many copies. They went out of business. I never got a statement, never got a penny for it. So this company Green World, who I gifted actually both Rat and Motley Crue to them, they came to me and said, okay, so we know you don't have any money, but you seem like you know what you're doing, so we'll give you a pressing and distribution deal, meaning that they would pay for all the manufacturing and distribution, and all I had to do was just bring them a piece of music that was done. So
wowee.
I was like, oh, okay, I can do that. Yeah. I was like, okay, I can do that. So I just started asking bands hey, if you guys can record something, we could put something out. And again, you're talking 1982, and that was still a big deal to have a record out on whatever label it was. So bands like Bitch and then Armored Saint and Omen. Shout out to Omen. Somebody mentioned Omen earlier in the chat.
Yeah.
I just started putting out. Oh, there you go. I just started putting out these records, and over time, but it was just me in my mom's garage in the San Fernando Valley, California, with no air conditioning, which was really fun in August when it was 106. And I was doing everything. I was doing literally everything. But it was fun. I loved doing it because it was an exciting time to be involved in this music, and you see other people liking it, and it had a life to it. So it was a lot of fun. But that's how it became. But it wasn't really. I don't think it was a real thing to me until probably the third year when it started to get kind of bigger, like 85, that's when, Hell Awaits came out and other things started happening. That's when this is the thing.
Was the Bitch record the first release? The
first release we did was a Bitch EP called Damnation Alley. So Be My Slave was probably the fourth or fifth album we put out.
Right. Is that right, Count Ralphus? Bitch is playing the Rage of Armageddon Fest in Brooklyn next year.
That's not surprising.
Oh, cool.
It's very funny, and regardless of what anybody thinks of some of those early bands, there's bands that I personally just sort of dismissed from some of the early, Metal Massacre comps. And some of them are fucking big deal now. Cirith Ungol is super popular now.
That is one of my favorite stories of all time. Cirith Ungol was this really quirky, weird little band from Ventura, California.
Crazy high-pitched vocals, you know.
And they didn't fit in at all. I'd get them gigs opening for Slayer and all these other, and no, they couldn't draw a crowd. They couldn't get people into it. But I loved them. I thought they were so unique and so great. So they put out a few records and just kind of everything just kind of went away.
Great covers.
Amazing. Yeah, Michael Whelan. Somehow they got this famous artist, Michael Whelan, to commission him. He didn't do stuff, originals, but he would give them his album covers, and I don't think they paid him anything or a couple $100 or whatever. And anyway, so I was in Europe at a festival around 2008 or 9 or something. I started seeing people wearing Cirith Ungol shirts. I'm like, who knows about Cirith Ungol? It just became this underground phenomenon in Europe. And then it just kind of, from there, just all of a sudden blew up. Even our good friend Monty Connor, who I love, Monty eventually came to me and said, look, dude, I totally missed out. I never liked Sirathungal in the early days. Now I love them. I'm such a huge fan of theirs. So I guess the music aged well, apparently.
He and I had that conversation, but there are all those like metal resurgence type festivals, right? Like the one that was just mentioned that looks like Bitch is going to play. There's a bunch of those all over the country now, and
The world.
over the last couple of years, Sirathungal was like a fucking headliner.
I know.
Are they
Crazy.
back together? Do they play these things?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, they got back together. Another quick funny story about them. So I went to see Tim Baker, who's the singer, asked me if I could get him and his son tickets to see Killswitch Engage. I said, yeah, sure. So they went to the show, and I was asking Tim, I said, why don't you guys get back together again, man? You've had all this big resurgence, and people in Europe love you. And he's like, I don't know if I can sing again. But yeah, they eventually got offered enough money and kind of got it together. They reformed, and Tim sounded amazing. They did one record, and they did a whole bunch of touring and headlined a lot of these crazy fests. And now they're kind of on their farewell tour because they're getting older, and it just doesn't make sense for them to do it anymore. But they had a renaissance for like 10 years. They put out a really great new record, and it's just fun because I always love that band, and they're such good guys. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, have this career was awesome.
Let me. This sort of plays into my next question. Any unsung heroes from those Hallison early days, like anybody who sort of maybe didn't get their just desserts, so you felt was just, a big part of the whole thing, or deserves a little love?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, there are a lot. I mean, somebody mentioned Omen earlier, and I love those early Omen records. They were just so good, and like classic heavy metal. And I still listen to those records today and think they're great. But they never really got off the ground in a big way. Just it's early days. There's no managers. There's no agents. There's no way to really make things happen. The singer, rest in peace, was a phenomenal singer and a great guy. But when he drank, whole nother story. So there are things, but there's same thing. Omen, the original guitar player Kenny Powell, he's still out there doing Omen. They're playing all those old school festivals like that. So So yeah, but I always thought they could have been gone to a next level, but never did. But there's a lot of those.
I feel like Armored Saint like came close to touching the ring, but because his vocals are so fucking good, and I believe this is a true story where at one point Metallica considered a vocalist and wanted John Bush.
Wanted him. They courted him heavily.
Is that right? I always thought that was just sort of like a vague rumor.
No, I thought that was. I heard from reliable enough people that was accurate.
Wow.
And then Anthrax does get him. Which I happen to like that album, but it's so different for me because Joey has such a distinct voice. But it's a really good album, but it's a very almost hard rock album as opposed to like maybe what Anthrax had been, known for. But his vocals are great, and
he's so good.
And I thought that Chrysalis album was just, it felt like Armored Saint was produced by a hair metal producer.
Yeah, that's the problem. That first record, I heard the rough mixes were amazing.
I bet.
And then Michael James Jackson, who's a great producer, just sucked the life out of it.
It's just you want to say overproduced, but it's soft, is what it is. Like they're
100%.
You could tell that there's power in the tracks, but it wasn't put together that way in the end.
But I look at Armored Saint this way, like they're still having a great career. They're still touring the world. They just were out with Wasp and did this great tour, and they've been putting out amazing records, and they're really enjoying doing it. And it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So let's say they had a gold record in 1985. Who knows what could have happened to that band, what direction they would have gone, or if they would have been happy. And like I said, here we are 40 some years later, they're still out touring. They still sound great. They still look great. They're having fun doing it. And that's ultimately really what it's all about. Like, fame, fortune, whatever, it played out well for them. So I'm happy for those guys.
That's great.
Interesting. Count Ralphus and a couple other people say Hallows Eve for me was the metal blade band that could have been used, and other people are chiming in too. Apparently, a beloved band that that didn't go over the top, huh?
So they were like kind of in. They're from Atlanta, Georgia. Great dudes. Love that band. They're phenomenal live. And I actually, ended up kind of co-producing and mixing a couple of the early records. But I love them, and they're a really great thrash metal band. But it's just one of those things where, in the music business, why doesn't a band become successful? Well, it's generally you need a team around you. You need a manager. You need an agent. You need a lawyer. You need a record label who are, number one, always behind you, and number two, all on the same page. I equate it to a car. If a car has four wheels, if all four of those wheels are rolling in the same direction, that car's going to go fast. If one's not, it's not going to go anywhere. Yeah. And that's kind of was the story with Hallows Eve. They never got a break with a manager or an agent or a big enough tour. There's definitely some internal stuff that kind of started happening because, I'm sure they were frustrated too. And they're another one that absolutely should have been a lot bigger, but it's just tough. There's a lot of bands and a lot of things, and you're a lot of competition for stuff. And if you don't have that team around you, it's difficult.
Sure. I think it's interesting that you mentioned their team because I think a lot of people know who that band is, right? But I refer to them and bands like them as first of four bands, as in when you get to the show, they're always going to be first of four. Because ultimately they're like unlucky, right? On one level, they don't really have their shit together, and they just don't present themselves as like, you're supposed to respect the shit out of us. You know what I mean? And a good band that just couldn't get past that sort of, perception.
Yeah. I think that's very fair.
This holds true in any genre, really.
Everything.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say how he's right, spot on there.
Yeah.
Because they play a million shows, but they were never the headliner. Yeah. I'm not even sure they were the direct support ever, and you'd see them, but you forgot about them by the time the other bands played.
So before we get into your history, Brian, with this band, let me take a sponsor break for a couple minutes, talk about some upcoming shows, and we'll come back and let's talk about your history with Slayer and the DRI and Corrosion and the future of the books and so on and so forth. So let me take a sponsor break. Be like 4 or 5 minutes, okay?
Perfect. I can use the bathroom.
There you go. Howie, I'll see you in a minute. There you have it. Our guest today is Brian Slagel from Metal Blade Records, co-hosted by our friend and neighbor, Howie Abrams. We're going to be talking about Slayer and what else do I got here? We got Slayer, Little Face Warning, Goo Goo Dolls, and so on and so forth, the books and everything. So stay tuned. We're going to take a lot of questions today. We're setting the world on fire. Since 1992, Generation Records has been a mainstay of the New York metropolitan area music scene. Today, they offer a diverse selection of new and used rock, jazz, indie, hip-hop, punk, hardcore, metal, blues, soundtrack, and reggae LPs, as well as t-shirts, posters, and other merchandise. They buy used record collections and music memorabilia and will pay you top dollar for them. House calls made for large collections in the tri-state area. Call or email generationrecords@gmail.com and follow them on Facebook and Instagram.
Will that be cash or in debt?
Do you mean debit?
Yes. Sorry. Another eternally satisfied customer.
Yo, what's happening? I'm out here at one of our all-ages Sunday matinees on the Bowery. I hope that you are enjoying today's show. I just want to let you know that the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live needs your support. Please step up. There is a Patreon page that has a lot of unique program. Shows are announced there first. Lots of good stuff. There's a PayPal address right there on the screen if you want to make a contribution. There's also a super chat function. You could do that, but the bottom line is this show exists because of your support. We're going to be doing it for a long, long time. Thank you for all your support through the years. Back to the show.
reality. You're a victim of the digital age, a 21st century casualty. Open your eyes, you're losing control. Open your eyes, put down the phone. Conditioned by misinformation, it's just the media telling us lies. Decipher fiction from the truth, society's slow and tragic demise. Open your eyes, you're losing control. Open your eyes, put down the phone. Everyone's got their fucking...
And we're back. This is the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live. Hey, want to mention a couple upcoming shows. There will be a show this Wednesday, a Rare Wednesday show with Renee Mata, musician, music exec, producer. Lots to talk about with Renee. Sunday, December 29th is West Beach of the Plasmatics. Nathaniel Shannon and his St. Vitus book on Sunday, January 5th. Matt Henson of Noise on Sunday, January 12th. Wednesday, January 15th, we're going to do a Delta Bravo Urban Exploration team show with Jimmy Ferrari, which is going to be a lot of fun. Just announced this the other day from Iron Cross and Gray Matter, DC Hardcore represent Mark Haggerty on Sunday, January 26th. Yo, excited about this one. Sean Stern and Mark Stern. You know what? This reminds me of Youth Brigade and Punk Rock Bowling. You know what? I'm going to take this opportunity to announce that Incendiary Device is playing Punk Rock Bowling this year. So anybody out there that's going to be in Vegas for Punk Rock Bowling, we are heading out and we are playing, and we will be playing with 7 Seconds and Negative Approach. So more on that to come. Yo, big score here. Listen, this is a guy that doesn't do interviews. Of course, you know, I was in Antidote with him for a minute, but you know, his time in the Misfits was legendary. Arthur Googie will be on the show on Sunday, February 9th. So this is one of those things. Listen, sometimes we book these people. They don't, you know, a little bit of a wild card, and we hope that it actually happens. Well, this might be just one of those things. Merle Allen on Wednesday, February 19th, co-hosted by Joel Ghostin. And come on now, we announced this the other day. We got Dave Lombardo coming on the show, and we're gonna talk a little bit about Dave and his former band in a little bit. And then we rescheduled Carl, who had a family issue, Carl Agel from Corrosion and Lead Foot and Seizure, for Sunday, March 9th. So lots happening. That's what's going on. And, you know, we run the commercial. Please support the show. There's a Patreon page and a PayPal. This show exists because of your support. The best way to support the show is be a patron on Patreon. Please support the show. It's for the people, by the people. We've been at it a while, and we will continue to be at it a while. There's also a super chat function. So if you have a question for our guest when it's question time, you know, do a super chat for a couple bucks. It comes through in color. I can't miss it. You go to the front of the line. But please support the show. And thank you to everybody that has supported the show. I want to shout out Susan Antonson, who just jumped on Patreon. Thank you. And also, there's room on the boat for a sponsor, for one more sponsor. So if that's something you'd like to do, reach out. Don't be shy. Let it fly. Let's make sure everybody's okay. All right. Let's bring our guests back on. Of course, our co-host, Howie Abrams, and
Hello.
Metal Blade Records CEO, Brian Slagel.
Dude, hit me up when you're in Vegas. I'll be at Punk Rock Bowling.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, good. I'd like to go to a game when I'm in Vegas, but we'll see. We'll see what's happening.
If they're playing, let me know. I got tickets.
Yeah. It looks like a great arena they have there, huh?
Awesome. They do a game presentation unlike anybody else. The vibe in that place it's amazing. It's amazing. I love it.
I'm talking to also the Punk Rock Museum wants me to host a tour or screen one of my films. So we're
awesome.
we're sorting through all that now. So let's jump right back into it, and let's talk a little bit about your history with these guys and sort of how the hand played out.
So
there you go.
Slayer, I love that. Yeah. Bitch was playing a show at Radio City in Orange County, and there's two scenes happening in Los Angeles back then. There's a scene in Hollywood, it's Troubadour, the whiskey and all that, but there's an ancillary scene happening in Orange County at Radio City and Woodstock, two clubs out there. And Orange County was a little heavier, a little more metal than LA was, obviously, because the glam and all that sort of thing. So anyway, Bitch was headlining a show out there. They had a whole bunch of bands opening. I hadn't heard of any of them, so I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to go out and check out these bands opening and see if anybody's any good. And of course, one of those bands was Slayer. So they get up on stage, and I believe it was mostly covers, but they did do a couple of originals. And I just thought they were amazing. I'm like, holy cow, what is this? So I went backstage afterwards. They had a manager at the time named Stephen Craig. And I said, hey, I'm, Brian Slagel. I do these Metal Massacre records. I would love to have Slayer on one. And he's like, oh, that'd be great, man. We know about them. It would be really cool. So we commissioned them to do one song for Metal Massacre 3, which was Aggressive Perfector. And they recorded that. And, by the time it was even before that particular Metal Massacre came out, that they were doing demos. I'd seen them a couple times more live, and I was like, okay, these guys are really good. And I went and said, hey, if you guys can get some money together, we can record an album. And that's when they were like, this would be great. And they were able to come up with $3,000 from Carrie and Tom's dad, and we made Show No Mercy.
And that,
Thank you.
yeah.
By the way, Dave Lombardo's least favorite Slayer album.
And I did do some homework on it, and it's his least favorite Slayer record because of sort of the technical difficulties with the drums, right? Did he have to overdub his toms?
He had to overdub the cymbals.
Oh,
So because they were so loud, they were bleeding into everything, and so the engineer said, well, let's just do it without. So I'll never forget, the images are grained in my head of him standing there ready to like hit the cymbals when it came time. But he's so good that, I mean, nobody aside from him, and if you didn't know that story, you wouldn't know that they were overdubbed. He's amazing. My favorite metal drummer of all time, by the way.
Yeah. And this I mean, people love this record regardless of the sort of challenges. Why has this record sort of stood the testament of time, and why is it so beloved?
Sure. Well, I hate to pimp out things, but I do a podcast called 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal, which you can get on any place you listen to your podcasts. But I recently had on my buddy Kerry King, and we talked about Black Magic, the song. And we were both kind of like, why is this album, and specifically that song, because he still plays it in his solo band now too, and Slayer's almost always been their set list, and the kids love it. It's hard to say. I mean, that record though, that was the first time I was producing the record. That was the first time I was in the studio where I was like, whoa, there's something special happening here. Like these they're kids, they're like 18-year-old kids, but they were at some other level. And just writing this music and playing this music, they're so incredibly phenomenal. Like normally we produce a record, you're spending 3 weeks listening to this thing over and over and over again. You're sick of it. Like, I don't want to hear this for like a month.
Right.
But as soon as that record's done, I could not stop listening to it. And it just, for whatever reason, it's still, I listened to it the other day because I haven't listened to it for a while because, I was doing the podcast and I want to kind of refresh. I was like, man, I forgot how good, that's a great shot. I forget how good that record really is. And it doesn't sound all that terrible. So
no,
it did all right. But I think a lot of it is that was the first Slayer record, obviously. And I think a lot of people always look back fondly of a big band's first album, whether it's Kill 'Em All or whatever it may be for the most part, even Iron Maiden. And so I think that's definitely part of it, but it's a good record with a lot of really good songs on it, and they were kind of doing something quite a bit different back then too.
I mean, I could speak to the 1983ness of it all, which was like it's funny, like with thrash, right? Where for a while it was like this thing to find the fastest band, right? And everybody was into that. It was like a little game. And then, but from like Venom on, right? So you have Venom and you have Bathory and you have Merciful Fate, kind of kicking off black metal, let's say, which, to me, Slayer were not, but they were on the satanic and dark and evil side. Like this was one of the first American bands like to do anything that touched on that, right? And the fact that they were really good and they played fast and they had a sound, like they sounded like a very specific band that you hadn't heard before. So to me, that's what I gravitated towards when I first heard them was all of that was in this album.
By the way, we have a Metal Blade museum in Las Vegas as well. And there's a old flyer that's in there from Slayer that says LA's only black metal. So they were even calling themselves black metal.
Right.
Great.
So they were affiliating themselves with it. And then, that's what's so interesting about like 85 comes in that Venom Slayer tour, because it was the old and the new guard, right? Yep. And then, even I'm not going to speak for them, but I have read in interviews where they were like, my God, like we were so psyched to play with Venom and they were terrible.
Yeah. I mean, look, Venom, those first two records are absolute
unbelievable
monster classics. But yeah, they weren't the pinnacle of great musicians, sadly. But
that's for sure.
But they made great records, so that's all that matters, right?
And then they tried to make up for it with pyro, which they couldn't use on the tour.
Howard, you mentioned this Combat tour, and this is another one of those sort of releases, and this being like a VHS that really, really touched and connected with a lot of people. And what's interesting is I don't think the Venom stuff on here was even recorded at this show.
No, they refused because the Mantis, the guitar player, for whatever reason, didn't make it into the country. And, so he's not on it. So the classic Venom lineup is not together on this. They had two guitar players from two British heavy metal, new wave of British heavy metal bands that filled in for Mantis on this particular show. And so for whatever reason, I think Venom thought they were getting paid like on the spot to do this Ultimate Revenge video. And when they found out that they weren't, and then they didn't have their proper lineup, they just sort of refused. So the footage is actually from the Hammersmith Odeon in the UK on another home video that Venom had released previously. Right. But the Slayer footage, they are so good on this video. Like they're just in that moment where you're like, they're fucking scary good and just ferocious, despite the how the recording tames it a little bit, but it doesn't matter because the energy is so insane and their performances are so good that you're just like, anybody who hadn't seen them at that point would have to go see them immediately. It was that kind of thing. But that video was a very big deal and made a huge impact on a lot of the next generation of metal fans.
Sure. And it's like we mentioned before, at the time, a VHS release was cutting edge. This was a
video
deal. Like you could play it again and again, and
and people did.
Right. What is it safe to say, Brian, that like 85 was sort of the, I don't want to say peak year, but when a lot of things sort of really clicked for Metal Blade and the sun was shining? Is it fair to say 85, 86?
Yeah, I'd say starting in 85, it became a real thing. It was at that point. It's we're 3 years in. It's a real label now. I think I had a couple of employees, and we had an office. And it was becoming real. And a lot of these bands were starting to do well. I mean, Albert Saint had graduated to Chrysalis, which was a big thing for us because they were very open about where they came from. And we're getting mentions in these huge magazines, mainstream magazines that we wouldn't have been at before. So that was good. And obviously, Hell Awaits came out that year, and that was classic record. It's my favorite Slayer record just because of the variety of it. But it was a good year. Just metal in general was really happening, and it was good. It was good. It was fun, and it was also a little scary in a way because it was becoming real. It's like, okay, I have responsibilities now. It's crazy.
And I was going to say, that's when you also started Death Records. And so was William Howell involved in that?
Yeah, so here's what happened. So Slayer had this band DRI opening for them a couple of
Sure.
shows, and they were in love with DRI, and as soon as I saw DRI, I mean, I got the first record. They had one record out. It's like, this is really cool, but seeing them live, I was like, oh my god, this band is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So started hanging out with them, great dudes, and I said, hey, I'd love to sign you guys, and they said, no, we're not signing with you. I was like, well, why? We get along so well. Because you're a metal label. We're
Yeah.
a punk band. We cannot be on a metal label. And at the same time, William Howell, who was our A&R guy, had discovered COC. And he was talking to them. And they told him the same thing. Like, we can't sign with you. It's a metal label. We're a punk band. So I said, all right, well, what if I just started another label, called it something else, and then would you sign with us? And they said, sure. So that's when Death Records became a thing, because Death Records was not, and we didn't mention anything about Metal Blade anywhere on the packaging or even in the press releases or anything. We kept it all out of there.
Wow.
And they both said yes. So that's when we put out DRI and COC, and then we went on to do Cryptic Slaughter, Dr. No, Ugly Americans, The Mentors.
Mentors.
That's legendary times.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody in the chat, everyone in the chat room is going, Mentors. How about ask them about the Mentors?
Yeah, the Mentors. The Mentors were great. They were so much fun. My only real quick regret with the Mentors was I always wanted to, like, El Duce was the main guy. He's one of the funniest people I ever met in my entire life. And he'd be in the studio just cracking jokes as we're recording. And Bill Mattori, the engineer, we're like, our insides are hurting from these jokes. And I always wanted to have him just come in for a night, give him a case of beer, and just let him talk and do a spoken word album. We never did that. Damn it.
Yeah.
That would have been fantastic.
Oh my God.
Because he was living out here for a while. So, like, we would see, like, me and Scott Givens and all these guys, like, because, you know, we all worked in the same building, and we'd go out and, like, you'd see El Duce somewhere, you know? And, like, anytime you ran into him, he became the night, you know? Like, he became the sort of focal point of the rest of your evening. And it was unbelievable because all the lyrics and the song titles and the stuff he would say between songs, that was him, you know, like that's exactly who he was. And so you would be entertained. It would be like your own personal mentor show in a weird way. But it was amazing. But, you know, just getting into that DRI and that COC album, I mean, you know, I was a big crossover guy because I was a metal kid first. And then, you know, probably around 83, I started to really discover like the hardcore punk stuff. And, you know, especially a year later in New York, you have Agnostic Front, Victim in Pain come out. And like, we have great albums, Homegrown, you know, and all that. But like DRI and COC, those two albums specifically were the ones that got metal kids going to, hardcore shows, especially out here, because we had such a regular thing with the matinees that, you know, if you'd been going sort of long enough, you know, you would know that a lot of the people at those shows were new people. And, you know, not to mention that they had long hair and, you know, clearly they were still, you know, kind of metalhead looking people. And it was just very interesting to watch it happen, but it revitalized, I thought, and still think, revitalize the scene out here because, you know, ultimately the just the New York hardcore sound, the original New York hardcore sound had become a little stale because there were so many bands doing it now and not all of them are doing it well anymore. That sort of AF, Cause for Alarm, Antidote, you know, even Negative Approach, right, from Detroit.
Ouch.
But that's where a lot of that sound came from, right?
It's all right. I can handle it.
And so now you have these kids who could sort of play a little bit, had better gear, you know, like weren't afraid of the crunchy guitar sound, and were playing faster, you know, or at least as fast as the punk bands were.
Yeah, all of this seemed to me, just from a fan's perspective, is a natural progression, right? Because the reason that Metallica and Slayer in particular sound like they do, and you know, Anthrax as well, is major punk influence.
Yep.
You know, Jeff Hanneman of Slayer, probably more of a punk rock guy than he was a metal guy. And he brought that punk element. And James Hetfield, Metallica, was into punk. And, you know, Lars was so the merging of those two, the punk and the metal movement, that kind of made those bands who they were. So it just, on my level, it made sense that punk rock bands would kind of do this crossover thing where metal and punk and then hardcore would meet. And that's what kind of happened with the whole scene in New York, and, you know, what was happening with, you know, the bands we were doing. And I just thought, as a fan, it was awesome, because I just loved that music so much. It was fresh and new and different. And I'm always about what's next and what's fresh and new. And it's just such a great thing to see. And eventually, you know, the fans started to come together, because, you know, in the early days, punk rock shows, metal kids weren't really well regarded.
Yeah.
Luckily, when I was a kid, I didn't have super long hair, so would go to all the punk rock shows, and nobody would give me a hassle. So in LA, at least.
Yeah.
Jeff Hanneman was a big American hardcore. He loved hardcore, because
big time.
He wore a one of one agnostic front shirt in the Ultimate Revenge video, and people were like, "Where'd you even get that from?" And then we realized that the day before, I think it was the day before the show, there was actually a press conference for Venom, and sort of around that Ultimate Revenge event. And a lot of the people that went to that, because I think there was like free beer, were like the people in the bands in New York. So, like, there's photos of like Abaddon with Billy Milano and guys from AF and like all this stuff. So he must have gotten the shirt, you know, at that show. And then Roger from Agnostic Front told me, he's like, that's the only one we ever made in orange. Like, nobody's ever seen that shirt again. And Jeff Hanneman used to wear that proudly.
Oh yeah,
cool.
He was a huge fan. But, you know, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I did want to mention, because we're kind of talking about the merging of you know, hardcore and punk and metal. So in the early 2000s, obviously metal in the 90s was not in a great spot, especially in the mainstream. And the underground was good, but it was struggling. So hardcore saved heavy metal. When all of these new, you know, metalcore bands came in, you know, On Earth, As I Die, Killswitch Engage, Shadows Fall, you know, on, that saved metal. That brought in this new influx of great new bands with new influences, and it brought the entire metal scene up, because these kids were also very much like, you know, hey, I love the hardcore stuff, I love Iron Maiden. Sure. But what it also did on a completely other level that saved the business part of the genre is all of these hardcore guys who were like Tim Bohr, booking agent, you know, Von Lewis managers, all these guys who are managing these hardcore bands came in and started managing some of these new metalcore bands. Yeah. And what I never really, you know, I was a fan of hardcore, but I wasn't like big into the scene. What I realized is the hardcore thing, like, all these bands love each other. They're all rooting for each other. They're all really good people to deal with. It's one for all for one. And no egos, no nothing. And we didn't really have that much in metal before. There's a lot of, you know, competition and egos and stuff that, you know, I always thought we didn't need to have. And the hardcore thing brought in this breath of fresh air, and all these new people that are still in the business today and working for, you know, massively big bands. And I just wanted to point out, I think that was so influential and very important for the metal scene starting in the early 2000s.
And shouting out our friend Chris Contos, says the Bay Area defined the merge of punk and metal.
Yep.
Yeah, it was going up. Yeah, in New York and in San Francisco. Hey, Brian, have you ever seen your hardcore Legends trading card? You ever see that?
No.
Yeah, there you go. Boom.
No, not nice. Oh, I got the Thin Lizzy shirt on there. Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And that's the front. And wait, I got the back too. And the back, apparently, he does a great job. Josh Hurst does a great job with these. Here's the back. Yeah. And apparently you're a little credited there as guest vocals on a couple on Hallows Eve, Flotsam and Jetsam, and Amon Amarth. Is that right?
That is correct. I was part of the gang vocals of a bunch of those songs. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. By the way, real quick on talking about the Punk Rock Museum. So I went and actually went when my buddy Greg Hedson was doing a tour, and I showed up. I didn't tell him I was doing it, so it was kind of fun. But I was hoping there might be one or two Metal Blade artifacts in there. There's 16. like tons
Wow.
of flyers, DRI, COC, Slayer. Like I was blown away by how much Metal Blade stuff was in there. So I'm like, thank you, Punk Rock Museum.
That's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward. I haven't
great.
been there. I haven't been
It's
there
great.
yet, so
It's
I'm
great.
looking forward to. I'm on a call with them tomorrow to sort out the whole thing. Hey, Howie, what's funny is I hear the siren.
I know, and you mute me, so
And I mute you.
Brian, we're
And
a block apart.
And
Yeah.
now it's coming down my street.
But by the way, it would not be a New York podcast if it wasn't a siren in the
Fuck,
background.
man.
Come on, that's New York.
But what's funny is
You
like
hear that?
if it's going
yeah.
west, I hear it first. If it's going east, he hears it first. And it's like he mutes me, so he knows like right when it's going to be by my apartment.
I love it. I love it.
I have a
Hey,
question.
That's
Hey,
so New
Howie,
York.
have you seen this?
What's that?
Jesus Moses.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that one a while ago, and he's a great guy. And he was at the Roger and Stigma event, right? Was he at the Roger and Stigma event in Beverly?
Bro, the ambulance just pulled up in front of my building.
Oh no,
No, geez.
It just pulled up in front of my building.
it's coming for you.
As long as it's not for you.
Hopefully, man.
It could be a cop.
Yeah.
I have a question, Brian. Like one
please.
thing further to what you were just talking about this sort of merger of those sounds and all of that. One thing that I got and really, really learned about that something that I saw from afar as a fan, but then really understood later was the importance of Europe to all of this stuff we're talking about, because they were so fanatical about like so many of these bands you were putting out, and that they had this festival culture that we weren't used to here. And these bands, and I was thinking first, the hardcore bands and the metal bands really met each other over there because they would have such diverse bills, where you'd have a show with like Deep Purple, Slayer, and Agnostic Front, you know what I mean? Like on the same show.
Yep.
And those still happen, you know what I
Yep.
mean? Not with Slayer, obviously, but maybe in the future, who knows? They're playing some shows. But ultimately, a lot of these bands formed even more of a bond because of Europe and the way that Europe doesn't get as precious about the subgenres the way we do here, where it's like, I only like this kind of metal. It's like they don't really do that there as much. They might like some symphonic death metal and also like a punk band, and whereas here it's like kind of unheard of, right? And I want to know about what your experiences have been with like putting out the bands in Europe and, what that's done to spread all of this.
I mean, look, Europe is vitally important to us and everybody. It's a huge scene over there. It's our, obviously the U.S. is probably our biggest market, but we have a lot of bands who are bigger in Europe. I mean, Monomarth is selling out 10,000 seat arenas in Germany.
Right.
It's incredible. But yeah, and I've always, I think part of the thing I love about the Europeans is, like you mentioned, the festivals. Festivals are amazing. And if you've never been to a European festival and you're a metal fan, at some point you have to do it. It's a once in a lifetime experience. There's a million great bands there. The vibe in the audience, I've never ever, I've been, I don't know, 50 festivals, never seen one fight ever. Never seen an argument ever. Like they're just there to have a good time and enjoy the music. And it doesn't matter if it's Living Color or Abaddon, or it doesn't matter what it is. They love everything and they're very open-minded about that stuff. And it's just a really great experience. They're run really well. And I mean, it's been vitally important to a lot of these bands, because where else could a band like, when they're first starting out, play in front of 30,000 people, like a band like, let's say, Primordial.
Right.
You normally play a 600-700 seat club, but now you can play in front of 30,000 people at a festival, and a bunch of those kids will go like, "Oh, cool! I really like that band." And you see a band play a festival, and then all of a sudden you get the royalty statements later. It's like, "Oh wow, they sold some records to some new fans." So yeah, it's the scene of the culture over there is I mean, it's metal. I mean, they started it.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is that the crowd there will sit through, like here in America, we're like, fuck, I got to sit through the first two opening bands and then there's two more bands. There, that audience will sit through 20 bands, like pee where they're standing, and like just not leave their space in the field. It's like the attention span's unbelievable.
And these, these festivals, they start at 11 in the morning and go till like 3 or 4 in the morning. And you would think at like 11 in the morning, there's going to be nobody there.
Yeah.
I've seen bands go on in front of like 25,000 people at 11 o'clock
At 11 in the morning.
I've mentioned before, like, when I was rolling with Biohazard in the early 90s and when I was managing Marauder and they'd play these festivals, and this was in the early 90s, we'd be like, who's on this festival? Wait a second. David Bowie, Kiss, Fun Loving Criminals, King Diamond,
Right.
and we'd be like, oh, hell yeah, Kid Rock. And it was playing festivals. I mean, and it's still pretty much the same, but back then I saw like, I'd go like, oh, I want to see Immortal on this stage, and then I'm going to run over and see Kid Rock on that stage. And it was just fucking great. It was a lot of fun. And I haven't been over there in a minute, but
it's still that way. It's still that way. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But then you
totally
also have the festivals that are like fucking purely metal, right?
Yeah.
And they'll throw in some
purely
hardcore in there.
Yeah.
They'll throw some hardcore in there, but that's like the biggest deviation there will be, right? So it'll be like Madball playing with, like some giant, sort of blackened death metal band as a headliner in front of 50,000 people, in a field in Germany or Poland or wherever. And it's that stuff, the diversity blows me away, but so does like the purity of some of the other ones. And they draw as many, if not more people as the ones that are diverse.
I was sort of traumatized by like going to so many of those in a row back then, that I had to back off for a while,
They are intense.
Yeah, they are. Let's. What was the impetus to sort of put the two books together?
Yeah,
this is the second one, right?
That's the second book. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to put up the first one.
You're good.
First. I got a little mixed up.
So we were coming to I think it was our 35th anniversary. So I kind of got over celebrating these anniversaries because we've done so many of them, but it's important to people. It's like every 5 years to 30, 35, whatever. It's like you guys should do something. So for the 35th, I'm trying to think. We've done kind of everything that there is to do to celebrate this label. So a couple of people came up with the idea of a book. Like, did you ever think about writing a book? And I was like, I'm not really, but I had so many people and so many like, prominent people within the metal world that said, you really should tell the story. It's an interesting story. I think people would like it. I'm like, all right. So I talked to a few co-authors, just more because not that I couldn't write it. I started as a journalist, creative writing and all this sort of stuff. I just don't have time to like write a whole book myself. I kind of feel bad when I see other people like Gay Lee and stuff who like wrote the whole book themselves. I'm like, damn it. But anyway, interviewed with a couple people and showed this guy, Mark Eglinton, who's done a ton of books. He did like books on Nurgle and KK Downing and a whole bunch of stuff. And he's a really good dude over in Scotland. So just started talking to him and we have the same kind of wavelength and he writes the way I speak. And it was actually a really fun project to do because, when you're doing this, you're just every day is a different day and you're thinking ahead and not behind. So it was a really fun experiment for me because I had to go back and kind of relive all these things. And I kind of forgot about some cool things that happened. And there's some stories in there I was like, oh, I forgot how that happened and came about. So I wrote the book and it was just kind of like, here's our 35th anniversary thing. And we did it. And I was honestly shocked, absolutely shocked and blown away by the reaction. Like, I figured, a few people would buy it and it would be okay. But I mean, the reaction is like, I don't know, like 95% positive. And I constantly get people saying, I loved your book and I read the book. I love the audio book, which was a nightmare to do, by the way. Horrible nightmare. I still haven't done it for the second one yet. So, but the reaction was, I was honestly blown away and by a lot of same people, a lot of peers that I respect a lot of, and so it was fun to do, and it's a good read. And then all of a sudden, everybody's like, "Well, where's the second book?" This book is really short, and I kept it short because it's like it's a book about a label. It's not super exciting, so I didn't want to bore people out. And everybody's like, "No, we want more stuff." So I'm like, "All right." So I wrote book number 2, and Same thing happened. Like the response has been amazing, and it's just it's really cool to see people still on social media going, "Hey, say I just read your new book, and it was really great." It's weird, like thinking like I'm an author now. It's just bizarre. And one quick funny story.
Please.
So when when the book came out, it was like #1 on Amazon Metal for I don't know, like 8 weeks or something, until Bruce Dickinson's book came out, which rightfully so, he should be higher than I am. But at some point there is like you can read about it if you want to Google it. I'm not going to rehash the whole thing here, but there's a little bit of controversy. I thought it was the nicest book ever, and I didn't want to piss anybody off, but I did make one person mad, and that controversy became a thing with all the metal press and everything, and the book went back to #1 for like another week or two.
Naturally.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Count Ralphus says, I love both of Brian's books. Is there a third one in the works?
Well, it's a couple things about that. Well, first of all, I need to find a publisher. BMG did the first 2 books, but they don't do book publishing anymore, so I'd have to get another publisher. But
We can talk.
Yeah. I actually do need to talk to you about something about that.
I know some people.
Yeah, I know. So it's possible. There's also another possibility that is equally as intriguing to me, is a hockey book, because I've got so many hockey stories, and I've been telling a lot on various platforms. And so somebody said, would you be interested in doing a hockey book? Do you have a lot of stories? Excuse me. So, there's the picture with all the hockey jerseys.
This is great.
By the way, that's like, from what I have seen in that video interview you did, this is probably 15%.
Yeah, that's about right. You can go on YouTube and the Golden Knights actually did a special on I have a whole house in Vegas. It's filled with all my memorabilia stuff. It's kind of it's kind of insane actually. But it's definitely possible for a third book.
This is your hockey jersey. Signed hockey jersey collection?
Game worn, right?
Game worn?
So I have over 2,000 hockey jerseys. About 900 of them are game worn. Most of those are minor league jerseys, but there's probably 10% of them are probably NHL jerseys as well. And then I've got sticks and pucks and helmets and programs and pocket schedules and all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever got to thank you for the list you contributed to my first book, the Merciless Book of Metal Lists, where you gave me the most metal hockey players list.
Yes,
that's awesome.
Which was great because it was so different, and basically, now it's funny because like I've probably gotten much more into hockey over the last bunch of years because I have friends that are hockey nuts. And it's funny because when I worked at Roadrunner, I was surrounded by hockey nuts, but I never really latched on to their like going to AHL, on AHL trips and all that stuff, and like finding out what bars the players hung out in, and they would, go to those bars like pre and post game and all that. But I've gotten like way into it. So it's like, it just means a lot more to me now. And I have friends that work at the NHL. So it's like, it's become much more part of my world than ever before. Not to the degree that it's part of yours, but like, it's still pretty good. Like I've always been a Rangers fan, but I know now because I can watch hockey games where I don't have a horse in the race and enjoy it,
Well, I'm just blown away when my two worlds collide, and they collide a lot now. I've become really good friends with a lot of people at NHL.com, NHL Network, a lot of the writers. Like we'll go out to dinner together when we're in the same city, and I just like sitting there with Chris Johnston and Pierre LeBrun and all these Mike Rupp, all these super famous people I watch on TV, or Dan Rosen, and I'd be able to have dinner with them and talk to them, and it's like, how do you guys allow me into your little world? No, we love you in our little world.
You should be
crazy.
You should be picking the artists that play at the All-Star Weekend. Like
I have actually offered my services because they had somebody playing one of these NHL events. And I never heard of them at Rock Band. I never heard of them. And they had like 5,000 followers on X.
Right, nobody.
Like, nobody knew who they were. And I go, look, guys, I can get you like a big band that will do this stuff for probably for free. That is infinitely bigger. But the NHL is. I've done a lot of work with NHL.com, but I've done a little bit of work with the NHL. And it's a very conservative place. And
they had fucking Machine Gun Kelly play, right?
Yeah, it's super
Terrible.
conservative, and they're very they're very careful about what they do. So it's fine. I get it.
Yeah. But
Hey,
but
just-
I vote for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just on the hockey tip, it got me looking into my archive for a second because I scan stuff, I label stuff, and it reminded me of my 1984 Rangers Islanders stub from the Garden.
Nice.
You know?
Wow.
Yeah, and like those were battles in 1984. Rangers.
Oh yeah.
No, that was real deal rivalry right there.
Yeah, and at the Garden.
I went to a Rangers Islanders game at the Garden. It might have been the first one I went to, and this is probably 1980. I don't think it was 84, but probably 85 or 86.
Yeah.
And this is when the Garden was just the two levels with the one walkway around the whole Garden.
Yeah,
and I was kind of up high, and I was watching this Islander fan. It was a Ranger Islander game at the Garden. And this one Islander fan started getting into it with these Ranger fans, and they ripped off his jersey and set it on fire. Like right in the Garden, like right there where we could see it. I was just like, this is insane.
Dude, I remember it being at the Garden in the late 70s, early 80s, and up in the blue seats when the opposing team would come on a fast break, they would throw D batteries onto the ice, like big D batteries.
Oh, I've heard.
And like it was crazy. And here's just another one, just for this. I mean, not to veer off on this, but these are like cherished mementos. You know, I was in on season tickets in '87, and it was like I went to a lot of home games that year, and they had this one has Phil Esposito on it. This stub. And but the Garden was before they renovated and just one more from that from my collection.
I love the Garden. I've probably seen 100 hockey games there. I love that place.
Here, Jean Rattel, man.
Nice. Jean Rattel.
Yeah.
That's classic.
See, there is a cross between metal and hockey because at the Garden, I was at the show when they were lighting seats on fire at Judas Priest. So, it's like we just like to light shit on fire at the Garden.
Well, every hockey game plays metal. I mean, there's not one team that doesn't play metal. So they go hand in hand.
Yep.
Hey, let me take a very quick sponsor break, and let's come back and let's take some questions from around the world. Okay.
Cool.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll be back I'll get you back in a minute. There you have it. This is the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live. Now's the time. Post your questions. Go deep. Get weird. Here we go. We are sponsored by blah, 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 and the Texas Silver Rush. They're a jewelry designed firm and boutique store located in the birthplace of the Texas country music scene in Fredericksburg, Texas. They specialize in working with musicians in all music genres to design and create unique one-off pieces, as well as to style them for stage, album covers, promo photos, and social media exposure. Their client list includes Rock and Roll Hall of Famers Greg Riley, Ringo Starr, and of course, Agnostic Front. Information on online sales are being taken at their Facebook and Instagram pages, and of course, www.texassilverrush.com. Mad Vintage buys, sells, and collects band shirts, primarily hardcore. The DIY operation was started and is operated by a hardcore kid who just loves collecting and eventually got into vintage clothing, specifically the realm of vintage band shirts. They are always looking to buy out collections to either keep, sell, or trade. New shirts added daily at www.madvintage.com and posted on Instagram. Dig deep into that closet of crapola and reach out to them. Help me help you, Mad Vintage. Last but not least, 126 Hardcore Clothing is a streetwear brand for restless individuals who don't compromise. They are about being spontaneous, positive, and true to yourself. For years, they experimented with several printing methods and materials and collaborated with a large number of designers and illustrators, always giving room for fresh perspectives while retaining the hardcore attitude. Get in touch with them and ramp up your game at www.126clothing.com. Just a couple of reminders. Please follow the show on Instagram. Pick up your communication device right now at Stone Films NYC. Also, if you're watching the show in rerun on YouTube, there is a subscribe button right there. Please subscribe to the Stone Films NYC YouTube page. Like I said, there's a super chat function. If you have a question for our guest, please do a super chat and you'll come straight to the line. Any questions you have for our guest, Brian Slagel? I know people have been posting them the whole show. Now's the time. repost them again. Just want to mention a couple of events that are coming up. Let me clear the deck. Couple events coming up. Of course, Howie.
Yeah.
What's going on with this?
So next Saturday, because there's sort of nowhere to get signed Stigma books at the moment, we decided to do like a last minute event at Generation Records in New York City next Saturday, the 21st, from 3 to 5 p.m. Vinny will be signing. They will only have 50 copies, actually, of the book at the store that day. But we're going to have a very special guest, Santa. And we're going to be doing some eggnog and some mistletoe and Santa photos for a donation to a nonprofit that Jimmy G from Murphy's Law is very fond of, involves animals and dogs. So come on down. It's just going to be a hang. No Q&A, no fucking reading from the book. We're just all going to hang out. And it's a last chance opportunity to get a signed copy of Vinny's book as a gift for the holidays.
Good. So I'll be there. I'll stop by. And then let me just run through a couple other things. The day after that, at Sunday, December 22nd, of course, is our annual free all ages holiday slamboree at the Bowery Electric, co-hosted by Women of the Pit. It is a coat drive. So bring down a winter coat. DJ Cindy Halfrats, non-residents. We're doing the My War thing, Fire is Murder, Shoot the Five, and Serial Poets. I'm excited about the My War thing we're doing. It's kind of like a punk rock karaoke. I'm playing some guitar with a couple other guys from other bands, and we're having different singers come up, including Pete Stahl from Scream and Scott Earth and Davey Hooligan and so on and so forth. And yes, it is a Women of the Pit coat drive. Good stuff, important stuff, and it is free and it is all ages. Want to mention that the Noise Show, Sunday, January 19th, that was originally booked into the Bowery Electric. Jesse asked me, he's got some Bowie thing going there. We moved it to Berlin around the corner. It is Noise, ID, American Eagle Reunion, Brass Knuckle Brigade, and Tear Gas. Don't be scared. Come on out. Bring that nagging wife and bring them booger-eating kids. Sunday, February 16th at Berlin, once again, Bobby Steele and the Undead. We're excited about that with Sad Plant, Star Car featuring Sab Gray from Iron Cross, Car Bomb Parade, and No Call, No Show. And then, we thought we'd get it back to where it all began on Sunday, March 2nd. We, ID, are playing the birthplace of New York hardcore at the A7. A very rare, unique show. It's free. It is 21 plus, but we are basically playing a room the size of your friggin' closet. So first come, first serve. So that said, let's bring our guest back on, Brian Slagel, and let's see what we got here. Let me see.
Someone was asking about whether or not, and I always wondered about this.
This is a good. Is this what you're getting at?
Yes.
Count Ralphus asks, was there ever a rivalry with Johnny Z, and did you guys have a relationship?
So, I mean, in a way there was, just because, we were starting out and, East Coast, West Coast sort of thing. But what I always tell people was, I knew Johnny. I was very friendly with Johnny. I actually became way more friendly with him after he left the business.
Right.
Because he would always see me and go, man, I never should have left. And, it's great you're still doing it. But we're all fans, right? So people ask about the labels, whether it's, Nuclear Blast or Century Media or, Megaforce. Is there a rivalry? I mean, it's technically it's your competition, sure, but we're all in it for the same thing. We all love the music. We're doing it to better the music, and we all have to work together. So there was never any sort of bad relationship with him. I didn't know him very well in the early days, just because he's in New York, I'm in LA, and in the first the big Megaforce time, I wasn't in New York a whole lot, so I didn't really get to see him or talk to him too much until probably well after that.
Cool. David Moydell, good one. Hey, Brian, how was it working with King and Merciful Fate? Drew and Howie, thanks for doing this one, of course. But give us some King some perspective on working with King, who just seems like the greatest guy. I mean, anytime I've interacted with him.
Yeah, he's great. By the way, new single just finally dropped last Friday, so you can check that out.
A Fate single?
King Diamond.
Oh, King Diamond single.
Yep, King Diamond single. So we did this in the 90s. We had both King Diamond and Merciful Fate in the 90s. We had King Diamond on the label, and I selfishly wanted Merciful Fate to reform. So I kept asking, like, well, do you think we could do this? We could do this, and eventually, I guess, unbeknownst to me, the band kind of were getting together talking about that too. So we ended up having both King Diamond and Merciful Fate on the label at the same time, and they just rotated. You know, King would put out a record, then Mercy would put out a record. King would put out a record, Mercy would put out a record. You know, King would tour, Mercy would tour. King would tour, Mercy would tour. Until one tour, King and Merciful Fate toured together, which as a fan was phenomenal. Not so much fun for King. I said, can we do that again? He's like, never again. I'm not going to do that. But we just go back and forth. So right now, King's focusing and working on the new King Diamond record, which should knock on wood everywhere. Should be out next year sometime, and then he's going to tour. And then the following year, there should be a Merciful Fate record and a Merciful Fate tour, and it'll just kind of go back and forth from here on out, just like we did in the 90s, basically.
Nice. He sounds incredible still.
Yeah, no, I saw him the last show here in Dallas. I guess it was about a week ago. And man, he sounds so. And he had missed a couple of days because he got really sick on the road. But he still sounded phenomenal. It's amazing.
Amazing.
I'm looking for my where's my great King Diamond picture from back in the day. I'll find it.
Somebody, I guess, wants to know a little bit about
this one's funny.
Yeah, go ahead.
Slayer put out a record called Live Undead about 40 years ago, and supposedly the Undead put out a record called Live Slayer. Has Brian ever heard of this? Thank you.
Yeah, somebody mentioned that to me, and I thought that was it's just brilliant. I love that. It's like, well, that's smart. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking about your relationship with Flotsam and Jetsam.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I love those guys. You know, they've kind of been on and off the label. Obviously, we signed them at the beginning, and then Jason went on to be in Metallica, but the band continued on with a couple more records. They got signed to a major label, which, as always happened in the 80s, the bands that got signed to the majors never really worked. Came back to us, and then they've had various forms of bands and stuff. And so we've been on and off working with them, but they're still out doing it. And talk about a guy who still sounds amazing. Eric A.K., the singer from Flotsam, he's another one of these guys. Like, that guy doesn't age at all. I saw them, I don't know, a couple of years ago and heard the latest record, and he sounds phenomenal.
Yeah.
Great dudes. Phoenix, Arizona.
Here, talking about those like early 90s European festivals, right? There you go.
Drew and the King.
There you go.
That's awesome.
That's like 90, I don't know, 92 or something, 93. Yeah, that was fun. Let's see what else we got. Heading down the home stretch. Okay, yeah, thank you. This is coming from Damien, who did the Riot, did the recent Riot multi-part doc, which was really good, and Metal Blade reissued a lot of the Riot albums with cool extras and insets. What was the motivation for that, and any general thoughts about Riot?
I'm a massive Riot fan. Fire Down Under is probably in my top 20 records of all time. It's a game changer record.
Incredible.
So, we went about in the early 90s when we got to Warner Brothers about reissuing records that weren't out on CD yet. So we did 5 Thin Lizzy records, 3 Alice Cooper, 3 Deep Purple, Stars, a whole bunch of stuff. And we went back and got the rights to a lot of the Riot stuff as well, which was kind of complicated because it's a long story, but we ended up getting the rights to Fire Down Under and a bunch of stuff and put it out on vinyl and CD and everything else. And then, had a relationship with Mark and the band, and they kind of reformed Riot in the early 90s, and we ended up putting out all those records, and those were really good records. And they kind of had another little, different singer, obviously, and everything, but they had a nice little run in the 90s, especially in Europe. Those are really, really good records. So yeah, we've done a bunch of stuff with Riot. I've just always been a huge fan. Loved Mark. He was such a really great guy to work with, super humble, really nice. Rest in peace, obviously. And I always loved the band. And those records just didn't exist for a long time. And it's driving me crazy because it was before streaming and anything else. It's like these records need to exist. It's too good.
Fire Down Under is a friggin' masterpiece, and also like don't become their singer because you die,
Yeah.
which is pretty fucked up. But like two great singers, and just didn't live long enough, nearly as long as they should have. But great band. I love because sometimes you hear something like Riot and you think you're the only person who loves it as much as you do, and you're like, oh shit, thank God other people got the same thing I got out of this.
Oh yeah, Eddie Trunk's another huge Riot fan.
Yeah.
This is good question, Jaja 9000. Brian, what's the biggest difference when it comes to signing new bands in the old days versus nowadays?
It's a good question. People ask me that. I don't know that there's a huge difference necessarily, but I do think that our perspective has changed a lot these days, where before, if we heard a band and we liked it, we just signed it. It didn't matter if they had anybody managing them, if they had anything going on, nothing. And that's true today. There are bands that we've done like that, that don't have a lot going on that we sign just because we love them. But now it's a lot harder to do something if a band doesn't have a social media presence, a manager, an agent, just some semblance of some form of team, because we're kind of so big now that if we put something out, there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of people that work behind the scenes, and putting out releases these days is very difficult and time consuming.
Sure.
So it does change a little bit, where you do have to be like, hey, if let's say there's two bands, right? Band A and Band B, and we love both of them equally, but Band B has a lot more going on, we'll probably choose Band B over Band A. It's just a purely business decision, sadly.
Yeah, and I've talked to A&R guys and that don't need to be mentioned, but basically telling me, at this point, when a band comes into their orbit, they look at the analytics, who's on, how many followers they have and what's going on, and this is a big. I'm not saying for everyone, but it's been mentioned that like that comes into play. Like, is this a band that do people know who this band is on social media? Is this a band that's hustling, that's putting their stuff out there?
But the good news though for bands out there is there's a whole, I mean, I don't know how many of them, there's maybe 15, 20 tiny little independent metal labels, usually one man band sort of things. And a lot of the bands we sign now come from those labels, where they'll put out a record on, a tiny little label. It'll do really well, and it'll come into our radar, and then we'll go, okay, we'll pick them up and make sure that we help out the younger labels too. So that's another avenue for these bands too. If they don't have anything going on, well, just get with one of these little labels and make something happen.
Right.
This is a good one, and I'm sure you'll answer it correctly. As someone who remembers the early days, does Brian like the last Metallica album?
I love the last two Metallica records.
I think Metallica record is pretty great.
I think both the last two,
last two. I mean, Spit Out the Bone on Hardwired. That's
great.
Definitely in my top 10 Metallica songs all time. It's so great. And the new record, 72 Seasons, the song, the riffs in that song. I saw James Hetfield when they're playing in Phoenix, and I went up to him. I said, "I'm really mad at you." He's like, "Why?" The riff from 72 Seasons is in my head. It's been in my head for a month. I can't get it out. He's like, "Yeah, thankfully the riffs are still coming." So yeah, I think the last two records stand up big time.
Drew, you mentioned that you wanted to ask about the Goo Goo Dolls. We forgot.
I know, right? I'm so glad because I have, it's one of those shows where I took a bunch of notes and it's like, so.
But we probably hit almost everything.
Yeah, we did. But the Goo Goo Dolls thing, Metal Blade, is very interesting because I happen to know that Goo Goo Dolls early on were a very punk-ish kind of band. How did the Goo Goo Dolls come into your orbit and end up on Metal Blade, and how did you sort of split with them on the cusp of them really kind of going supernova?
So here's what happened. So Mike Faley, who works at Metal Blade and has been there forever, is from Buffalo, New York. So Goo Goo Dolls from Buffalo. So his one of his friends, knew who the Goo Goo Dolls were, and also William Howell, who we mentioned earlier. He was a big fan of their first album, and they both came to me and said, "Hey, there's this band in Buffalo called the Goo Goo Dolls." Or, we had Death Records, our punk rock subsidiary label at the time, and I listened to the records, thought they were great. Saw, heard that they were really good live, super fun. And I go, yeah, let's do it. And the early records were very punk rock. It was like Johnny, the bass player sang half the songs, and then Robbie sang half, and then Johnny sang the other half. And they were just a fun punk rock band. But we knew there was something happening there. And a big reason why we ended up having a deal with Warner's were two things. We're tired of losing bands to major labels and have them screwing it up. So we had to align with a major, and it was between them and CBS and Sony. So we ended up at Warner's, and like I said, it became too corporate. But with the Goo Goo Dolls, we put out a Boy Named Goo, and we thought that was going to be a big record because we thought this is it. This band made this great record. They're going to explode. So we start, putting out a couple singles and spending a lot of money on videos and things. And then this song called Name that literally was like a afterthought. Johnny was like, hey, I have this acoustic song. Should I put it on the record? Like I wrote it, but it didn't sound like anything else on the record. I'm like, if it's a good song, throw it on. And Kevin Weatherly, who was the program director at K-Rock in LA, which was the big seminal station, one night put it on the radio and said, hey, what do you guys think about this? And the next thing you know, it's exploding out of control.
Wow.
And we're like dropping the other song we were working on. And literally overnight, the band went massively huge. Yeah. But in our deal with Warner's, we knew the direction the Goo Goo Dolls were going to. It wasn't going to make any more sense for them to be just on metal plate. The early stuff made sense. So we had it in our deal that eventually they were going to be handed over to Warner's, and Warner's was going to take over. And that basically happened after A Boy Named Goo. And, we had points and all that other stuff on it. So I was just happy they finally got the success because we thought for years, this band is so good and they're making so great records. And if you listen to, for example, Superstar Car Wash that was on the early independent Metal Blade stuff, that record, I'd forgot about it until I listened to it a few years ago. Man, it sounds an awful lot like the Foo Fighters. Awful lot like the Foo Fighters. So, yeah, they're just a cool punk rock band on our punk rock label. A lot of fun, great guys to deal with from Buffalo. And, we signed them and like I said, we thought they were going to be big, but nobody knew they were going to be big from ballads.
Right.
Yeah. Let's do one or two more questions and we'll wrap it up. Good one from Josh. Hey, Brian, what bands could Brian not sign, but you really wanted to? Was there anybody that one just got away, or we were so close?
Sounds like Metallica was one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you could absolutely say Metallica was one. Probably the other one was Pantera. So I knew of Pantera in the Hair days, and I used to hang out with those guys when I'd be in Dallas a few times, but just wasn't really into the music. So fast forward, and they were managed by my good friends at Concrete Management, and they had made
Walter and Andy.
Right? Yep. And Bob.
And Andy, who, by the way, is managing Biohazard right now.
Oh, nice. So they'd made Cowboys from Hell, and we had just got to Warner Brothers. We were the deal was not even 6 months old, probably. They said, hey, we have this Pantera record called Cowboys from Hell. Would you be interested in putting it out through your new Warner's thing? I go, sure, let me hear it. So I heard it. I was like, wow, this is a lot different than the other Pantera stuff. But they had a number in mind, and I can't remember it exactly, but it was for the time, it was a pretty big number. Mm-hmm. And I kind of weighed it in my head. I go, that's really good, but that's a lot of money. And, we're risking this new Warner Brothers money. And I decided to end up passing on that record. And that was probably not a very good idea. Whoops. Yeah. You can't win them all, though, right?
Well, your ear was in the right place.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was just really financially, but in retrospect,
where did they end up on Atco?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yep.
I always thought that was odd. They ended up on Atco.
They put out the money, so
they laid out the dough, right? Why do you think Jonathan Zemo Z? Why do you think metal has a larger and long-lasting appeal worldwide over other genres?
Yeah, I often wondered that. I think, I honestly, I think it's I talk about the metal community as family. Like we're one big family. Like everybody gets along. The bands get along. The people in the business get along. Fans get along. Like we're all in it because we love the music, and it's a very real form of music. Like there's nothing fake. People aren't using tape. Like people aren't doing this music because if we do a heavy metal song, we're going to get really big and make lots of money. Like that doesn't exist in our world. Like all these bands are doing it because they're fans. They love the music. It's real and it's genuine. and that just stands the test of time. I think you see all these new generations of kids coming in that just connect and love this music, and these new bands coming in with young kids in their 20s that connect and love this music, that are creating new music that blows me away. There's a ton of new bands coming out that are really kind of game changing the whole genre and doing stuff that's mind blowing. So it just keeps going, and I think it's because it's real. It's a real, honest form of music.
Right on. On that note, you know what? As we're heading towards the door, I have to ask, what does the future hold, Brian? Looking ahead, what's coming up for you and for Metal Blade?
Look at the crystal ball here, right? I mean, honestly, it really not a lot's going to change. I mean, we're doing this for 42 years, independent label. I'm not going to sell to any of the majors. I don't care about money. I don't need the money. I like the freedom of being able to do whatever I want. I like getting up in the morning and saying, I'm going to do this. And if you sell a company, you got to get up in the morning and say, I want to do this. And I got to call a guy in a suit. Can I do that? And I just don't ever want to do that. So, I think we're at a pretty good place as a label. We have a phenomenal staff. I love them to death, and they make my life a lot easier. And we've got a bunch of new bands that we're signing. They're really cool. This new band called 200 Stab Wounds has this amazing buzz, and they're doing really well. And there's some other stuff that we're working on that's a little bit different. That's cool. And I think I think it's important that independent metal labels exist. And there aren't many of us left. I mean, I was talking to some people the other day. There's Hopeless Records, and there's Epitaph, and us are, I think, the only three kind of bigger rock independent labels left. Like, everybody else is either owned by a major or somebody with a lot of money or something. So I think it's important to keep that tradition going. And long term, there's a succession plan for some of the younger employees who've been with us forever. God forbid, hopefully I can do this until I'm 90, but I'm not ever retiring either. So they're gonna have to.
Right.
I'll be at the office, and one day that's it. So, but just keep doing what we're doing.
Right on. Chris Canto says, much respect for you, Brian. You've always been true to the trade.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, somebody said to me, a gal said to me today, I like Metal Blade and I like Brian. They were the first to hire a lot of women at the label. Somebody said that to me, and that I was like, really? I didn't know that. Although any interaction I've had with your people, I realize have all been females. So there you go.
I mean, they really literally do run the company. Our president is Tracy Vera. She really runs the show. Our CFO is female. All of our product managers are female. I mean, I'd say at least our basically the person right behind Tracy is female. It's pretty much half and half. A little bit different in Europe. It's mostly male of our people over there, but in the grand scheme of things in metal, it's predominantly metal, and they do such a great job, and they're just really great people. It doesn't matter if they're men or women; they're really great people. But it is, I do feel for them because it's a little harder to be a female in the music business, let alone the metal business. But they do a phenomenal job.
Sure. Howie, do you have anything for Brian as we head through the door?
Yeah, I have a final question that I think, sums it up a little bit. Who's your goat metal band?
Oh, that's easy. Iron Maiden.
I figured you were going to say that, so I was anticipating that answer. I'm going to agree with you, even over Black Sabbath. Sorry, Paris Mayhew, but it is Iron Maiden. Ooh. And I also wanted to ask if you had to build a 4-piece, let's make it 5-piece metal supergroup, what's the lineup?
Yeah, you know what? I did this recently. So I got to remember if I can remember right. So drummer is Dave Lombardo.
Okay.
Bass player Steve Harris.
There you go.
One guitar player would be Tony Iommi.
Mm-hmm.
And the other guitar player, that was the one that I had the toughest thing because there's just so many great players out there. Let's see, Tony Iommi, and I'm going to say like in his prime, Michael Schenker.
Nice.
And then the lead singer, normally I'd probably pick Ronnie James Dio, but he's not with us anymore. So I will say Bruce Dickinson.
I'm going to say dead or alive, it's still Dio for me. And I love Bruce Dickinson as much as I loved Paul Di'Anno. Rest in peace.
Hey, if we can put in people that aren't here any longer, then Ronnie would be the guy.
Yeah, because to me, I can listen to him sing anything. Like, he's just my favorite of all time, and he's the bar, as far as I'm concerned. But I was interested to see, and it's you're right in line with about what I expected. I certainly expected you to say Maiden is the GOAT, because I've heard you say it, I think, before. But yeah, I was curious to hear that.
I mean, look, Iommi and Sabbath were the ones that started it.
Yeah.
So I've met pretty much everybody in the business, but I've never met Tony Iommi, and I don't get starstruck about like anybody anymore. But he would be one. Like, I don't know what I would say. Like, thank you for my life.
Right.
What do you say to him?
I know. I met Dio. He was one of the nicest people I've ever met.
Dio was awesome. We worked his Lock Up the Wolves record at Warner Brothers, and that was just so much fun. I always loved Ronnie. He was such a genuinely nice person.
I once bumped into Tony Iommi. It was like at an Ozfest, and I don't know. I was backstage, whatever. Or it was with whoever, and I was scooting down the hallway, and I turned the corner, and he was scooting, and I banged, and I went, "Ay, sorry, man."
Sorry, Tony Iommi.
Shit, that was and it also reminds me of on 57th Street how and this was going back to the got to be the mid 80s. I'm walking up 57th Street because my dad had his office there, and I used to work at Crazy Eddie across the street in the VHS video rental department. And I'm walking, and I see coming down the store, I go like, "Oh wow, Paul Stanley." And Paul Stanley, with no makeup on, with the ripped jeans and, and as he's getting closer, I'm like, what can I, I just couldn't find the words.
It's so crazy, right?
I just couldn't find the words to even just say, "Hey man."
Yeah.
But one other funny thing, I saw Kiss play like when the Meadowlands or and like I saw like a Kiss show, and it was in a weird time of their career. They were great. It was like the Animalized tour or something like that, but they were still great. And I drove into the city, and I was on 57th Street, and there used to be, when we used to go to these like magazine stores, and there'd be like racks, and we would just stand there and you'd look at all the magazine, right? You'd be looking at magazines, and it was like 1 a.m, 2 a.m, and I'm looking at like rock magazine, whatever. And I look over next to me, and it's Gene Simmons, right? And I just saw him play, and I said, "Hey, bro, great show." And he's like, "Hey, thanks." And we just went back to our magazines, and that's like a great New York moment, like that's like a great New York moment. So that said, thank you so much, Brian. We had some laughs. It was a great show. Thank you so much. Anybody you want to thank? Anybody you want to shout out?
Well, I'll thank you guys and shout out you guys and do your thing. Otherwise, I'm good.
Okay, cool.
That was fun. I was looking forward to this one for a minute because, like I was like, you can't fanboy out here a little bit, because I was just sort of like, I really have been such a fan of the label since the very earliest days. I mean, I really, I bought the first friggin' record that Metal Blade put out, and I still buy your records. I'm looking forward to Kill Switch and all these things. And so, I appreciate you very much and all of the things that you've done and continue to do. And it's nice when it's one of the nice guys doing it too.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks. I mean, look, it's thanks for all the support. I mean, we can't do this without everybody out there. That's for sure. I'll thank everybody out there, because we can't do this if you guys aren't supporting us. So much appreciation.
Cool. Hopefully I'll see you out in Vegas for Punk
Yes.
Rock Bowling.
Hit me up. I'm definitely going. My buddies in Power Trip are playing too.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Thank you, Brian. Have a good evening. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
See you.
Bye-bye. Woo!
Good one.
Oh yeah.
Could have done 4 hours.
Yeah, you want to respect the guest's time.
Sure.
And I also know that he had he was on camera before this.
Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah.
Just what needed to have mercy on his soul. But thank you, Stefan. It was a great show, man. Great. Paul Kostabi, what's up, bro? Got to get you on the show one of these days, Paul. Thanks, Larry, and everybody else. It was a great interactive. You know what photo that I didn't show him is this one here. And this is not, this isn't that, but this is a shot that I took at Wayne Gretzky's last
Oh,
game at Madison Square Garden when he played with the Rangers. This was his final skate around the ice, you know?
what kind of camera are you using for this?
Bro, I think back then it was when we used to carry those disposable things in our
Oh,
pocket.
it may have even been disposable, huh?
You know, you couldn't focus it. You just get what you get, you know?
You hope for the best.
You just get what you get. So there you go. I want to remind everybody out there that this Saturday at Generation Records,
Yeah.
Harry will be down. Come hang. I'll be down there for a bit with some of the gang, and it's Vinny Stigma, the most interesting man in the world, book signing down at Generation Records, and then of course the day after that is the Holiday Slamboree. So looking forward to that. Thanks, Howie. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Have a good night. Let's go get something to eat.
Yeah, one of these days.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
See you, bro.
Bye. There you have it. This was the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live. Fantastic show. We were brought to you by the Texas Silver Rush DTFM Vinyl Distro, Generation Records, 126 Hardcore Clothing, and Mad Vintage. Like I said, if you can, please support the show. The show needs your support. There's a Patreon page. There's a PayPal address and whatever, man. Your support is what makes this happen. Don't be a lurker. Don't be a shirker. Support the show that supports you. Hey, metal up your amp. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad we've connected. And hopefully you could stream some of the shows in the future. Travis Patrick, thank you. I appreciate it. Work hard on this, you know. Doesn't magically happen. Work hard, and it's just great when it comes to fruition with a great show like this. Thank you, Rotten Punks 999. It was a great show. Andy Tension, thank you, buddy. And yeah, we will be back on Wednesday, a rare Wednesday show with Renee Mata. So there you go. And you know the big excitement that kind of blew the internet up a little bit was was Dave Lombardo. I mean, people, Dave's a nice guy, and he reposted. All of a sudden, I'm like, what's going on with my Instagram? Like all kinds of people are fun. And I go, oh yeah, Dave reposted it. That was nice of him. So, thank you, Andre. As much as you love this show loves you, man. So thanks. So that said, everybody, thanks a lot. Tell your loved ones that you love them. And until next time, do good things, and good things will come to you. Boom!
Conditioned by indoctrination, conditioned by society. You're a victim of the digital age, a 21st century.